Marshall Peak, Chapter 5971, Personal Guard and Reinforcements. Dozens of heaven-destroying, earth-shattering attacks surged forward, causing even space to shatter. But at the center of this onslaught, Zhang Ruoxi remained calm and composed without any hint of panic. She raised the broadsword in her hand and lightly tapped the void in front of her. As the void warped, a void corridor was instantly formed. No one knew where the void corridor led, but a powerful aura was rapidly approaching from within the dark passage, surpassing even that of any royal lord or Ninth Order master. All the royal lords paled at the sight and became even more fierce in their attacks. However, before their attacks could land, a figure appeared from the void corridor. Then 2, then 3. In the blink of an eye, 8 figures had emerged from the passage, guarding the space surrounding Zhang Ruoxi. Only now did the royal lords who had come close realize the true faces of these unexpected guests. Small stone race masters. Many small stone race soldiers had appeared on the battlefield previously. They seemed to be peculiar creatures controlled by the human race that could fight alongside the humans. However, their strength was not generally too high, and after a series of intense battles, almost all from the small stone race had been killed. Even the royal lords never expected that this woman who appeared out of nowhere could also control the small stone race. And for the small stone race she summoned to be so ridiculously powerful. The aura emanating from each of these small stone race masters was comparable to that of a Ninth Order master, or possibly even more powerful. Moreover, there were 8 of them. These were Zhang Ruoxi's personal guard, a force that had never been seen before. Yang Kai was the only one who knew about the existence of these Ninth Order small stone race masters. When he went to the chaotic dead territory last time, he had experienced their might, and he knew that they were created through the harmonization of yin and yang by Zhang Ruoxi using her Heaven's Order bloodline. However, even Yang Kai did not fully know how many Ninth Order small stone race masters had been born in the chaotic dead territory. He only had an estimate. Back then, he had also attempted to bring them under him through the great sun and moon marks, but he had unfortunately failed. At that time he speculated that the only person who could control them was Zhang Ruoxi. So even though he thought it was a pity, he ultimately gave up on them. As it turned out, he was right. There were a total of 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters, and their auras were linked as soon as they appeared, instantly forming a magnificent battle formation. At the center of this battle formation was Zhang Ruoxi, who was being protected by them. The eyes of the Ninth Order masters who rushed over were bulging when they saw this, with Ouyang Lai exclaiming, "An 8 trigrams formation." The simplest battle formations was the 3 fortunes formation, followed by the 4 symbols, 5 elements, 6 paths, 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and finally the 9 palaces. The increase of each stage was based on the increase of cultivators involved. The stronger the battle formation, and the higher the cultivations of those involved, the harder it was to form. Perhaps there were some parties who could cooperate intimately under the high-rank open heaven realms that were able to form the 8 trigrams or even 9 palaces formations, but once the cultivation level reached the high-rank open heaven realms, it was difficult for higher battle formations to be formed. In the existing records, the highest battle formation that 7th Order masters could form was the 9 palaces formation, which was a miracle achieved by the Dawn Squad under Yang Kai's leadership. Besides him, nobody else in the 7th Order had achieved such a feat. Even the 8 trigrams formation was difficult to maintain for 7th Order masters because the pressure on the person acting as the core was too much. Meanwhile, the strongest battle formation that 8th Order masters could form was the 8 trigrams formation, which was used to kill pseudo-royal lords. However, every time 8th Order masters formed such a battle formation, the backlash resulted in some, if not all of them, perishing. From this, it can be seen that it was extremely difficult for high-rank open heaven realm masters to form higher-level battle formations. As for the 9th Order masters, generally no one would form a battle formation. Not because it was impossible. At the very least, the simplest 3 fortunes formation could be maintained, but because there were only so many 9th Order masters. Even if forming a battle formation could make one stronger, it also consumed manpower and reduced flexibility. The 9th Order masters were already the strongest fighting force of the human race, so rather than concentrating all their power in one formation, it was better to let them act independently, which could better bring out their abilities. Theoretically, however, 9th Order masters should be able to form 4 symbols formations, but anything higher may not be possible, unless they had someone like Yang Kai to act as the formation core. With his divine dragon body, he should be able to bear the burden of a 5 elements formation. As for a 6 paths formation, the possibility most likely only existed in theory. But what were the Ninth Order Masters witnessing at this moment? 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters had instantly formed an 8 trigrams formation. Even though they were separate individuals, they could perfectly form into a single entity without any strain. Such an incredible feat would be hard to believe if one did not witness it with their own eyes. 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters joining forces formed an impenetrable barrier around Zhang Ruoxi. Despite the attacks of the dozens of royal lords connecting as was expected, their heaven-destroying, earth-shattering techniques could not even budge the small stone race in the slightest. One should know that an attack of this level would injure even a giant spirit god. The royal lords were shocked beyond measure, but before they could react, a bright sword beam began to flicker, and the figure of Zhang Ruoxi, who was protected in the center by her personal guards, suddenly blurred. This just happened to be a moment when the royal lords were putting their all into delivering their most powerful attacks, so they did not have time to circulate energy into defending themselves. As the sword light flickered, black blood and heads flew. In an instant, the auras of nearly 10 royal lords swelled up before fading away. The surviving royal lords all retreated in shock. They had been living in the primordial heaven source grand restriction for their entire lives, so they had little understanding of the human race. However, they had been fighting against the giant spirit gods for months now, and they had the assumption that the giant spirit gods were the last trump cards of the humans. It was not until this moment that they realized that there was a more terrifying existence in this world besides the giant spirit gods. An existence of this level was something that perhaps only the Supreme One could defeat. The surviving royal lords wanted to escape, but soon enough, they realized that they were not only being pursued by the winged woman, but also by the Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters. The moment Zhang Ruoxi took action, so did the 8, who had formed the 8 trigrams formation. They spread out the battle formation and all charged towards the royal lords. The royal lords were caught in an extremely unlucky situation, but even though they had been injured by the purifying light before, they still had the heritage of royal lords and were not afraid of a single Ninth Order Small Stone Race Master. However, they soon realized that something was not right as they clashed with these small stone race masters. There was something unusual about the strength displayed by them, and it seemed to far exceed what should be expected. Upon closer inspection, they were shocked to discover that the aura of these small stone race masters were still closely connected to each other despite the fact that all of them were seemingly fighting alone. Most crucially, their auras were constantly changing and they could form different battle formations at any time or switch which one served as the core of that battle formation at will. The masters who had rushed over to help also noticed this, and all of them had incredulous expressions on their faces because what they saw before them was impossible according to everything they understood. When human race masters formed battle formations, they had to take great care in maintaining the connection of their auras. The worst possibility was if a battle formation collapsed due to the link being broken. Each time humans assumed battle formations, the masters had to divert some of their attention to maintaining its operation. However, when they looked at these Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters, it seemed that their control over their auras had reached an instinctual level. They could disperse or form any battle formation in an instant. One might think they were alone, but in fact they had 7 other brothers behind them who could help to crush their enemies at any time. They were just like parts of a single entity. As the group of human masters watched on, they felt both amazed and ashamed. They had no idea how these Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters did it, but they knew that the humans could never achieve such a thing. Even if they had full and complete trust in each other, each individual among their race had their own way of thinking. Even more fundamentally, there were differences in strength and aura among humans, so achieving a perfect balance was just now feasible. The appearance of the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Personal Guard not only helped to relieve Zhang Ruoxi's crisis, but also opened up a counterattack opportunity against the royal lords under Zhang Ruoxi's leadership. But that was not the end of it. The void corridor that Zhang Ruoxi had created with her amazing skills did not disappear. Following closely behind the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters, more of the Small Stone Race soldiers stepped out from it. They continued emerging in an endless stream, too many to even be counted. In just a short amount of time, an army of millions had gathered outside the void corridor. Even though there weren't many masters among them, their numbers were still a sight to behold. And all this was just the beginning. As even more emerged, they soon began covering the void, filling one's field of vision. Previously, when they were facing the constant influx of Black Ink clan reinforcements from the primordial heaven source grand restriction, the human race were at a loss, and there were even those who wished that they had their own reinforcements too. At this moment, that seemingly impossible wish was being fulfilled. Moreover, these small stone race soldiers were somewhat different from the ones that the humans had encountered before. Due to their low sentience, the small stone race acted almost entirely on instinct. This meant that without being refined and controlled by the humans, they were just like scattered sand, and it was difficult for them to unleash their full potential in large-scale warfare. However, those that walked out of the void corridor at this moment had formed one imposing and uniform army. The first small stone race army to come out did not blindly charge at the Black Ink clan, but scattered apart to guard the void corridor so that even more of their companions could emerge. It was as if someone was commanding and controlling them. Many human race masters who realized this turned their gaze to the figure who was slaughtering the royal lords and drawing an endless stream of wails from them. She was perhaps the only person who could command and control so many of them. The chaotic dead territory. Mi Jingluan realized where the void corridor led to. For so many small stone race masters to come out, the place the void corridor was connected with had to be the chaotic dead territory, a paradise for the small stone race. According to Yang Kai, the burning light and serene glimmer had nurtured countless of them, and the ones he brought out and handed to the human race were simply scavenged from the chaotic dead territory. Assist them in guarding the void corridor. Mi Jingluan made an immediate decision and changed his previous order. Martial Peak, Chapter 5972, Racial Superiority. Zhang Ruoxi no longer needed help from the humans to save her, but whether it be the void corridor that was connected to the chaotic dead territory or the opening at the primordial heaven source grand restriction, those places needed to be guarded, and they were also the key locations that would help the human race army turn defeat into victory. Everyone was glad since the two entrances were not far away from each other, so they would not have to scatter their forces too much to guard both points. At the same time as when Mi Jingluan gave his order, some of the masters from the Black Ink clan realized that things were taking a bad turn for them. Large armies of small stone race were constantly pouring out of the void corridor that led who knew where. In just a short while, tens of millions of them have come out. If they did not bring down that void corridor, then it would not take very long for the small stone race to even the playing field with them in terms of numbers. And if that were to happen, then it would not simply be the humans that they had to deal with. While the human race army were rushing to the void corridor, many masters from the Black Ink clan led their own subordinates in the same direction. The void corridor to the chaotic dead territory had instantly become a focal point of the battlefield, catching the attention of millions of pairs of eyes. Even though the human race army moved sooner than the Black Ink clan, they were also further away. So when they were only halfway there, the Black Ink army had already surrounded the void corridor in all directions, but the emergence of the small stone race had also diverted much of their attention, which resulted in the situation becoming much safer for the human race. A war that was even more intense from the fight between the human race and the Black Ink clan broke out. Although the human race army was completely made up of elite soldiers, they were very limited in numbers. During the previous confrontation, the human race army's strategy was to use superior mobility to slaughter as many enemies caught in their path as possible. Rarely would they engage in large-scale head-to-head confrontations with the Black Ink clan. The current situation with the small stone race was different. They were desperately defending the void corridor, so there was simply no way to retreat or escape. Once the Black Ink clan army were to come in from all directions, both sides would immediately break out into a stunning battle. Both sides were like two colliding torrents with countless bodies caught in the rolling waves. Those from the small stone race were constantly incurring casualties, but their numbers were also being replenished continuously. Even though they were far inferior to the Black Ink clan in terms of numbers with battle formations and momentum, they managed to hold their ground. It was as if there was an invisible hand that was controlling everything about the small stone race, so that these creatures that were supposed to have little sentience and could only act on instinct could now be molded into a single strict army that knew when to advance or retreat. There were not too many masters among the small stone race, and the drawbacks of that were soon apparent. This was Yang Kai's inadvertent mistake when he took so many 8th Order and 7th Order small stone race masters with him on his last trip to the chaotic dead territory, resulting in the small stone race army lacking masters among them. The small number of 8th Order small stone race masters here were no match for the pseudo-royal lords, so no matter how much they replenished their numbers, it took only a few moments of fighting before the Black Ink Army were able to find opportunities to rip several openings into their line of defense. Fortunately, the human race army arrived just in time. Under Mi Jingluan's command, the humans immediately split into several groups and plugged into the different openings to fill them. With the help of the 9th Order masters, they were able to hold their line, albeit only barely. The situation was still not looking optimistic. The Black Ink Clan army's attack was growing increasingly intense, and if the small stone race army couldn't gather enough mass, then there was still a risk of their lines being broken through. The small stone race in the Void Corridor were already gathering their troops at the maximum speed possible, but they could only barely keep up with the rate of their casualties. The defensive line kept on shrinking and the space for the joint forces of the small stone race and the human race to move around in was constantly being constricted. Black Ink Clan seemed to have found a ray of hope and was attacking more and more aggressively. Originally, Zhang Ruoxi's emergence and ruthless slaughter were enough to deter the royal lords who were eager to attack, and now no royal lord dared to come out from the Grand Restriction, fearing that they would be killed next. However, one royal lord saw the situation from the opening of the Grand Restriction and rushed out without care to hold back the 9th Order masters and put pressure on the opposing forces. Now the defense line being held up by the human race army and the small stone race army was in danger of collapsing at any moment. Once the defense line collapsed, not only would they not be able to defend the Void Corridor, but even the human race army that came to help would also be caught in the Black Ink Clan's encirclement. At that point, other than the 9th Order masters who had the ability to escape, the others would all be at great risk. Red-Eyed Ada was fighting a group of royal lords. He had always been silly and foolish, so he was surrounded by the royal lords previously until he was covered in injuries. Now he only wanted to kill his enemies ruthlessly without a care for anything else. On the other hand, Heir, who was smarter, noticed the situation on the human race army's side, but he was powerless to help even though he wanted to. Just like Ada, he was surrounded by royal lords and was simply unable to divert his attention unless he could get rid of them. The only ones they could put their hopes on, Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guard, were still chasing after the royal lords who had scattered and fled in all directions. There were dozens of royal lords at first, but only a little over 10 of them remained, all of whom were agile with their movements and had good luck, but under her pursuit they would also fall sooner or later. She did not seem to have any intention of coming to their rescue. Just as the battlefield on the joint army's side reached a limit and their defense was about to collapse, Zhang Ruoxi, who was chasing after the royal lords, suddenly stopped in place and without even looking, lightly clenched a fist in the direction of the Void Corridor. With this clenched fist, heaven and earth hummed and trembled. All over the battlefield, yellow and blue lights suddenly started moving. These lights came from the remains of the small stone race soldiers that were scattered among the Black Ink Clan army. Since they did not possess flesh, if they were torn to pieces, not a drop of blood would flow out. They would only turn into pieces of stone like this. The power that nurtured them still remained in the debris. It was naturally the powers of the burning light and serene glimmer, the purest power of yin and yang. As the light emerged, all of the Black Ink clansmen who were enveloped by it had frightened looks on their faces. They had no idea what the yellow and blue colors represented, but they had witnessed the power of the purifying light that Zhang Ruoxi had brought forth before. That was why the Black Ink Clan had gained an instinctive fear of this strange light. Most of the Black Ink Clan were still shocked by the changes around them. A few of the sharper masters wanted to retreat when they noticed the situation turning against them, but how could they have the time to run? The defense line of the human race and the small stone race had been suppressed again and again. The Black Ink Clan army surrounded them on all sides and were pressing hard, passing through the remnants of countless fallen small stone race along the way. It could be said that the Black Ink Clan's frontline army was now fighting amidst a sea of the small stone race soldiers' broken remains. The yellow and blue colors swirled together, quickly turning into a dazzling pure white light that was scattered at first, but in the blink of an eye, condensed together. The white light was like an ocean, covering the vast battlefield. From within that white light, The countless screams and wails from the Black Ink clan rang out. Regardless of their cultivation, all of their bodies began to sizzle as if they had fallen into a wok of boiling oil, and following that phenomenon, the black ink strength in their body began to dissipate and become purified. Those caught in the center of the white light were the most greatly affected, and soon, those with insufficient cultivation perished. Even if some managed to survive, their foundations were severely damaged. The best time to cull them was now, when they were weakened, and the counterattack of the human race and small stone race armies commenced in an instant. The small stone race members were being controlled by Zhang Ruoxi, who naturally would not miss such a good opportunity, and when the humans saw the flowing yellow and blue lights, they realized what was about to happen. After all, they had witnessed this kind of scene before from Yang Kai. So, before Mi Jingluan could even give the order, the human race army had already blown the horn to begin their attack alongside the small stone race army. On Pure Yang Pass, Mi Jingluan sighed in his heart. No wonder Zhang Ruoxi said that she was taught everything she knew by Yang Kai. This manner of dealing with her enemies is carved from the same mold. The Black Ink clan army suffered grave losses due to being caught off guard in this unexpected situation, and the troops on the front line were completely annihilated almost instantaneously. Even several of the royal lords, who had jumped into the battle from the primordial heaven source grand restriction, died in this trap. The defensive line that had been suppressed to the limit began to expand in all directions, and with the collapse of their army in the front lines, the Black Ink clan's rear also quickly withdrew. By the time the dazzling light subsided, the intense exchange of offense and defense had ended as well. The joint army's defense line was restored to its previous state, but they did not continue pursuing the fleeing Black Ink clan, not because they did not want to, but because they could not. Right now, their main focus was protecting the void corridor that led to the chaotic dead territory. As they watched the small stone race army gather in the void from afar, the Black Ink clan was overcome with grief and anger. The Black Ink clan possessed too many advantages over the humans. They were created from black ink nests, so they could be bred in numbers sufficient to crush the humans. Moreover, their black ink strength was also extremely disadvantageous for humans. If the humans wanted to fight with them, they had to make all sorts of preparations beforehand. For example, they had to take their purifying black ink pills just so they could defend against being corrupted. This was their racial superiority, granted to them by their creator. Nobody could change that imbalance. However, when compared to the small stone race, the superiority of the Black Ink clan crumbled. The small stone race may not be able to reproduce as quickly as the Black Ink clan, but they had an advantage in comparison to the human race. They had no fear of black ink strength, and they were even extremely sensitive to it. If nobody was controlling them, then they would simply rush to where black ink strength was densest. But what disgusted the Black Ink clan the most was the fact that these small stone race soldiers treated them as mortal enemies when they were alive. And when they were dead, the powers remaining in their bodies could still be drawn out to condense purifying light that perfectly countered black ink strength. Having suffered a huge loss twice already, the surviving Black Ink clan soldiers no longer dared to act rashly. So what if they wiped out those from the small stone race? Without the ability to dispose of their corpses, the rubble that was left behind was still a great weapon against the Black Ink clan. Looking from afar, the Black Ink clan army was hesitant to act. The small stone race was beginning to show some unusual movements. Everywhere the human race army was located, a small stone race army would be there, opening up a passage to the rear. Initially, the humans did not understand what they were trying to do, but soon the humans realized and reacted. The small stone race army had taken the initiative to open a passage to the void corridor, so as to allow the human race army to head inside to guard it. At the same time, the small stone race army surrounded the interior, the area around the void corridor, in layers so that the human race army had the chance to recuperate peacefully for a while. Martial Peak, Chapter 5973 Vigorous. This was clearly Zhang Ruoxi's intention. It was simply impossible for those of the small stone race to decide on such an action by themselves with their low sentience. Many of the human race masters were overjoyed. After months of fighting such a fierce battle, they hardly had any time to rest and recuperate. Each army was about to reach their limits, and even the Ninth Order masters were no longer at their peak. Otherwise, Mi Jingluan would not have had the idea of withdrawing the whole army previously. No one could have thought that a safe place for them to rest and readjust their conditions would still be able to exist in the middle of such an intense battlefield. Even though this time to recuperate would not last for long, in these circumstances, any time they had for recuperation was precious. So, after they understood what the small stone race army's intentions were, the human race army did not hesitate to retreat to the direction of the void corridor. The openings were once again filled in by the densely packed troops of the small stone race army. Looking at the small stone race figures that filled the void in all directions, the humans could not help but feel a sense of security, and the tension that had been building up in their minds over months had also eased up completely. A large number of pills were distributed, as well as various combat supplies. This time the human race no longer held any reservations. They used up all the supplies that they had been saving up since this was their last battle. This battle was about the survival of their race, and if they were to win, they would remain the masters of this world, but if they were to lose, then there would be no humans left. What was the point of rationing supplies at these times? Naturally, they should restore the strength of their army as much as possible in preparation for the final battle. Soldiers of the small stone race were still constantly coming out of the void corridor, and their number was growing bigger and bigger. The surviving Black Ink clansmen would not dare to act rashly anymore. Masters from the Black Ink clan were all looking at the small stone race, all of them feeling a throbbing headache over the situation. Moreover, what they had to deal with now was not only the joint forces of the small stone race and human race army. When Ada and Aer were joined by the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters on the other side of the battlefield, the royal lords who were attacking the 2 giant spirit gods were caught off guard. They were all so shocked that their souls nearly left their bodies. The 8 small stone race masters had appeared, so that woman must not be far behind. It was only then that the Black Ink clan discovered, to their horror, that all the royal lords who had participated in the attack against Zhang Ruoxi had fallen. This sent chills down the spines of all the royal lords. One had to know that there had been dozens of royal lords working together, and yet such a powerful force had been decimated in such a short time. The number of royal lords surrounding Ada and Aer was not far from the number of royal lords who went to attack Zhang Ruoxi, but their allies had all been killed, so they were probably next on the chopping block. When they noticed Zhang Ruoxi's aura approaching from afar, many royal lords left Ada and Aer and turned around, making for the opening in the primordial heaven source grand restriction. Together, they instantly broke through the defense line of the small stone race army, and plunged into the grand restriction without even glancing back. For some of them, it had only been days ago they were dreaming of escaping this cage called the primordial heaven source grand restriction and conquering everything before their eyes. They had waited millions of years for this dream to come true. However, the feelings of joy did not last long. They had now realized that there was no safer place in this universe than the primordial heaven source grand restriction. Unless the Supreme One woke up, no one could stop that woman's massacre. With nearly half of the royal lords who were restricting them out of the way, and with 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters assisting them, the 2 giant spirit gods turned the tide in an instant. Ada reached out and grabbed a royal lord who was trying to escape and, with a roar of rage, stuffed the royal lord into his mouth. No matter how hard the royal lord struggled, he could not shake off his huge hand. Once he had been sent into the large abyss, Ada bit down on him. As if he were biting into a worm, black blood spurted between his teeth and the royal lord's aura was instantly obliterated. Ada then roared, venting his anger. He was a powerful giant spirit god. Yet he was being put into such a miserable situation under the encirclement of the royal lords. This insult was simply unbearable. Aer did not stay idle either. He punched and kicked, each blow appearing simple, but could in fact crush a large piece of the void, blocking the royal lord's plans of escaping. The wings on Zhang Ruoxi's back flapped, sending her across the battlefield as a long pure white band of light trailed behind her in an exceptionally beautiful sight. She did not care about the battlefield where the giant spirit gods were, and instead charged straight past it, and into the opening of the primordial heaven source grand restriction. Many other royal lords were watching the battlefield from within the grand restriction, including those who had fled back inside. They thought that they were safe inside the grand restriction, but then disaster followed. A commotion erupted at the opening, and royal lords were being slaughtered rapidly, their miserable screams ringing in the void. At the center of the small stone race army's defenses, Among the human race soldiers who were recuperating near the void corridor, countless masters looked on in awe at this amazing scene. They had never felt as good and as happy as they were at this moment. Now that gets the blood going. Yonglai quietly wiped the sweat from his forehead as he refined the medicinal efficacies of his spirit pills. Even he did not expect Zhang Ruoxi to enter the Grand Restriction. It was truly an attention-capturing event, especially since that was where the Black Ink clan's mother nest or source was located. Who knew how many royal lords were gathering inside? He had met Zhang Ruoxi a few times before and knew that this woman was very close to Yang Kai, but he had never known that she was this powerful. But what tickled his curiosity even more was how this woman's shocking cultivation had come about. The power that she wielded had already surpassed that of the giant spirit gods. There were still an indistinct but large number of figures standing around at the opening, and many more of the Black Ink clan's reinforcements were pouring out to provide support on the battlefield. However, Zhang Ruoxi rushed in and cut them all down like vegetables, sweeping the entrance clean until no more of their figures could be seen, and the Black Ink clan's reinforcements also came to an abrupt halt. It was not until an hour later that a figure emerged from the opening, the wings behind her back still as glossy as jade, a sight that dazzled all that beheld it. "Damn woman! Have some consideration for the elderly." The voice of Wu Kuang rang out beside Ruoxi's ears, sounding slightly helpless. He was tasked with controlling the primordial heaven source Grand Restriction and was united as one with it in a sense, so every time the Grand Restriction was ripped open, he would suffer a certain amount of backlash. The openings that happened previously were mostly done of his own accord, so he could control them to a certain extent. However, when Zhang Ruoxi suddenly rushed in, the large opening in the Grand Restriction had been torn apart 3 times before, and though royal lords could pass through it, it was still not enough for someone like Zhang Ruoxi to pass through. Just now, Wu Kuang had almost shrieked when he saw Zhang Ruoxi rushing over. From his standpoint, it was as if an unstoppable force was charging at him. Even though he expanded the opening as fast as he could, he was still caught off guard by Zhang Ruoxi's sudden charge and he could not regain control for a while. The feeling was just like having his entire being ripped apart. And that was why he had to complain. Zhang Ruoxi smiled, more or less understanding Wu Kuang's meaning. She then apologized. "Forgive me, senior. It was Junior who was reckless." She was strong, beautiful, had a sweet voice and a pleasant demeanor. So what could Wu Kuang say? After holding it in for a while, he let out a sigh and muttered, "You did well." While others could not see what was going on inside the Grand Restriction, he could still feel a thing or two since he was in control of it. Within an hour of Zhang Ruoxi entering the Grand Restriction, no less than 30 royal lords had been executed. As for the weaker Black Ink clansmen, countless had perished. If not for the fact that the Grand Restriction was indeed unsuitable for long fights, Zhang Ruoxi would not have come out so quickly. Instead, she would probably have continued fighting for as long as possible before re-emerging. Senior is too generous. Junior has only done what was necessary. She looked up into the void. In the hour since she disappeared, something else had changed on the battlefield. The most obvious one was the fact that Ada and Aer had finally been freed from their predicament. The 2 giant spirit gods had been besieged by dozens of royal lords and were having trouble getting out, but thanks to Zhang Ruoxi's deterrent, nearly half of the enemies had fled back into the Grand Restriction. The remaining half were no match for the 2 giant spirit gods and the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters, and were soon smashed into pulp. At the same time, the small stone race army, which had been guarding the void corridor all this while, began to move as well. Up until then, they had been firmly guarding the space around the void corridor, and even had the strength left to provide a sanctuary for the tired human race soldiers to rest and recuperate. But as time passed, more and more small stone race soldiers emerged from the passage. There were now over 100 million of them, and even more continued to pour out. No one had any guesses as to just how many small stone race soldiers there were gathered at the other end of the void corridor still. The number of troops that the small stone race had already surpassed that of the surviving Black Ink clan army. So they attacked with determination. Divisions of the small stone race army launched themselves like rockets in the direction of the Black Ink clan army, holding them down in an endless spree of slaughter. A battle broke out again, but this time, the attacking and defending parties were reversed. In the short time that passed, The small stone race had already amassed enough forces to confront the Black Ink clan head-on. The Black Ink clan was still massive in number, but they were being purged at an astonishing rate, demonstrating that they were also exhausted and defenseless. The smartest option now would be to make a strategic retreat. But where else could they retreat to other than the primordial heaven source grand restriction? The void within primordial heaven source grand restriction was their home, their foundation, but even if they could escape, the primordial heaven source grand restriction could not move. To retreat back to the primordial heaven source grand restriction, they had to first break through the small stone race army's blockade. As a result, the Black Ink clan army had no choice but to fight. As for the consequences that could arise from killing them, the Black Ink clan lacked the energy to care right now. By the time Zhang Ruoxi showed up, the two armies had already been fighting for a while, and while the small stone race army had suffered some losses, the Black Ink clan had suffered much more than them. This could not be helped, as though the small stone race army did not have many masters compared to the Black Ink clan. They had the help of 2 giant spirit gods and 8 ninth order small stone race masters. The Black Ink clan's defense lines held for less than an incense stick of time before the 2 giant spirit gods killed their way through and began wreaking havoc on them. The same was true of the 8 ninth order small stone race masters. Even the royal lords who were lucky enough to survive the initial culling could not hold out long against them. On the other hand, the humans, the ones who started this war, were resting at ease with the strong protection provided by the small stone race army. This gave the ninth order masters that were led by Mi Jingluan mixed feelings in their hearts. Martial Peak Chapter 5974 Long-Term Goal. Strictly speaking, this second crusade was taking place despite the human race not being fully prepared. Readiness was not a matter of willpower, but rather an accumulation of strength. It was easy to see just by the results alone. Without the help of Zhang Ruoxi and the small stone race army, the human race would have been defeated already. The original plan was for Mi Jingluan to withdraw with the army and wait for Yang Kai to return before leading the survivors to a new, distant world. Once they left, this whole region, covering the entire 3,000 worlds, would surely fall under the Black Ink clan's total control. Was it because the human race did not fight hard enough? Was it because the heavens did not favor them enough? It was neither. Great potential could erupt from a race during the critical juncture between life and death. In just a short few thousand years, the human race has grown from near total decimation to recovering the 3,000 worlds in the No Return Pass, but that was already their limit. If they had not worked hard enough, they would not possess the heritage they have today, and if the heavens did not favor them, they would not have the open heaven realm cradles. However, when it came to facing powerful foes like the Black Ink clan, what ultimately mattered was strength. The time given to the human race was too short, so no matter whether or not they were ready for this crusade, they had to go on. That was because Mo was about to awaken. Under such circumstances, it was better to be proactive than reactive. After all these years of fighting, the human race army had already been tempered into one entity after going through the baptism of war, but it was still not enough. As the battle raged on, Mi Jingluan weighed his options before deciding to give up on supporting the small stone race army. The battle had not reached an end yet, and the small stone race army should have enough troops to hold their own. What's more, after this battle came to an end, there would be an even more treacherous one waiting for the human race army. The current human race army had to recover its strength for that impending moment. On the battlefield, cloud after dazzling cloud of purifying light erupted and filled the vast void, dispersing not only the scattered Black Ink strength, but also the Black Ink clan soldiers that were enveloped in it, severely damaging their foundation. The current situation on the battlefield was extremely bad for the Black Ink clan. The primordial heaven source grand restriction was no longer providing reinforcements, and even the royal lords did not dare to go near the opening to check out the situation for fear of being seen by Zhang Ruoxi and drawing her wrath upon themselves. On the other hand, the small stone race soldiers still had a steady stream of reinforcements pouring endlessly out of the void corridor and entering the battlefield. Even though the Black Ink clan had tens of millions of troops left, it was still difficult to hold off their enemies effectively after losing the few royal lords and pseudo-royal lords they had to the 8 ninth order small stone race masters. The 2 giant spirit gods rampaged, and the 8 ninth order small stone race masters were also advancing like they were chopping down bamboo. Division after division of uniformed small stone race troops swarmed in from all directions. The circle was constantly shrinking, and lives from the Black Ink clan dissipated alongside its progress. It wouldn't be long before the small stone race army was able to wipe out the Black Ink clan forces, scattered outside of the primordial heaven source grand restriction. Oh, on the 2306th world, where Yongkai was suppressing and sealing Mo's source, a large battle was similarly going on. Mu's shadow was holding back the many Black Ink disciples of this world on her own, so that Yongkai could suppress and seal the source piece in peace. Summoning the profound source gate, a slit cracked open from the gate. Within its suppressing and sealing territory, Mo's source piece poured out. As with all the times before it, the source piece seemed to be pulled by an inexplicable force towards the open gate. Yongkai had witnessed this scene many times before, and was not the least bit surprised. According to Mu, the profound source gate was a supreme treasure born alongside the universe, outside which the primordial light was born, and behind which the primordial darkness was nurtured. The primordial light was symbolic of all the brightness and wonderfulness of this universe. Not bound by the profound source gate, it left after its inception, but the darkness born within the profound source gate could not as easily escape. That was until the primordial darkness gained sentience of its own after accumulating for endless years. That was Mo. For Mo, the profound source gate had the natural power to suppress and seal it, which was why Mu hid the profound source gate in the primordial world. Only the profound source gate could suppress and seal Mo's source. Each of the previous attempts was uneventful. Once the profound source gate was summoned and opened up, the source piece would be drawn into it and sealed. But this time things were not quite the same. Yongkai could clearly sense Mo's source piece struggling violently, as if it had a consciousness of its own, trying to escape the pull of the profound source gate. However, it was still only a small piece of a whole, and in the end it could not resist the profound source gate's power. As the source piece was about to pour through the gate, a pair of eyes suddenly opened in the darkness. The eyes were so indescribably black that they seemed to contain all the darkness in existence. Even Yongkai could not help but feel a chill run through his body as they stared at him. Fortunately, it was just for a moment before the source piece disappeared into the gate, and the chilling sensation disappeared without a trace. We're reaching the limit. Yongkai had a feeling. He had traveled through more than 2,000 worlds on his journey, and had managed to suppress and seal almost 1,000 pieces of Mo's source. Mu had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces and sealed them into 3,000 different universe worlds, and through his journey, Yongkai managed to suppress and seal a lot of them despite all the twists and turns he encountered along his way. This amount was almost 30% of Mo's source pieces, which was already a very fruitful number. The more source pieces that were suppressed and sealed, the greater of an impact there would be on Mo. Even if Mo were to awaken completely at this moment, its strength would still drop drastically from its peak due to its compromised source. But it was still not enough. After all, Mo was said to be in the legendary creation realm. Without facing it directly, nobody could predict just how powerful it really was. Even without 30% of its sources, its remaining strength was still great enough that it was not something the current human race could contend with. Yongkai was slightly relieved to have gotten some news about Zhang Ruoxi from Wu Kuang. Wu Kuang's thread of consciousness only had a faint connection to his true self outside, so his perception of things was not very clear. So not only did Yongkai find his information to be unbelievable, but even Wu Kuang himself could not be sure. Regardless, he had to speed things up on his end. Before Mo awakened, he had to suppress and seal as many of the source pieces as possible, even if it was just one more. Senior. Yongkai turned around and shouted as he withdrew the profound source gate. Hearing this, Mu, who was helping to ward off the countless Black Ink disciples, rushed to his side and raised her palm, gracefully patting downwards. Following that, amidst the furious roars of the many Black Ink disciples, Yongkai's body turned into a stream of light and took off into the sky. Oh! In the primordial world, Little Eleventh's illness was getting worse. His small body was as cold as ice one moment, and as hot as magma the next. At first he was able to keep himself conscious, but by now he was mostly asleep, and the time he could stay awake was getting shorter and shorter. As he slept, he was haunted by unceasing nightmares that caused him to shake and shiver constantly. Mu remained by his side, watching him carefully. When little 11th finally woke up and opened his eyes, he saw Moo sitting by his bedside, holding him gently. Moo seemed to have sensed his movements as she looked down at him, her eyes bloodshot. She had no idea how long it had been since she had properly rested. "You're awake." Moo opened her mouth, but her throat sounded very dry. Looking at the red blood vessels in Moo's eyes, little 11th's heart ached. A sour taste filled his mouth and even the corners of his eyes grew wet. He turned his head away and wiped the corners of his eyes with his hand, answering with a soft hum. Moo placed her hand on little 11th's forehead and felt it carefully for a moment before saying joyfully, "Your fever has gone down. How are you feeling now?" Little 11th was silent for a moment before saying, "Much better." Moo smiled and withdrew her hand. "Good. Get some more sleep and you should get better then." Little 11th opened his mouth. "Sixth sister, I don't want to sleep." He had slept enough already. "Then what do you want to do?" "I want some congee." The sister and brother, unrelated by blood, had been living together and relying on each other for survival in this bustling city. Moo had cooked many delicious foods for little 11th, but what he wanted most at this moment was the plain rice congee cooked by her. This was the first food he had eaten since waking up in this world. "Sure." Moo raised her hand and gave him an affectionate tickle on the nose before getting up. "In that case, wait here for a while." Little 11th fell silent. Very soon the congee was ready. Moo brought in the pot of cooked congee and was just about to serve little 11th a bowl when she saw him get out of bed, sit by the table, and pull the pot closer to himself. Moo laughed. "You're planning to eat that much? Be careful or you'll spoil your tummy." Little 11th huffed. "I want to eat. It's not like my tummy is weak." Moo was helpless. Good, you can have it all. If you can't finish it, then you better watch out or I'll spank your bottom." Little 11th couldn't help but clench his butt a little and blushed. "I'm not a child anymore. Stop spanking me for no reason." As soon as he finished speaking, Moo pressed on his nose with a finger, immediately creating a pig's nose on little 11th's face. Little 11th shook his head in annoyance and sniffled. "You're so childish. You're always doing these childish things." Moo covered her lips and giggled, but she stopped teasing him, instead handing over the wooden spoon she brought. Little 11th picked up the bowl and held the clay pot in his arms, digging into his meal. Moo sat by quietly watching him, saying from time to time, "Eat slowly and be careful so you don't burn yourself. It's not like anyone is going to steal it from you." From time to time, she would help him wipe the corners of his mouth. The freshly cooked congee was so hot that little 11th kept sucking in his breath. Even his face had grown red and his head was steaming from the heat. It took about an hour, but he did manage to finish it eventually. Even the bottom of the pot was scraped clean without a drop left behind. Moo peered into the pot and joked, "If you ate nicely like that every time, I could save the effort of washing the dishes." Little 11th rubbed his round tummy and made a face at her. "Then won't you turn into a lazy woman? Be careful or you won't be able to get married in the future." Moo raised her hand and smacked him upside the head. "It's not up to you to say whether I can get married or not." Little 11th held his head with both hands and complained, "You're hitting me again. I'm still a patient." Moo raised her hand as if to strike him again, but in the end, she just stroked his head gently. Little 11th lowered his head. The atmosphere turned silent. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5975. Hello, we finally meet. In a humble house on the edge of Dawn City, a pair of sister and brother sat opposite each other. Only after a long time did little 11th speak. "Sixth sister. What's the matter? Let's talk after I've finished washing the dishes, all right?" Moo smiled, got up and picked up the clay pot before walking out. Looking at her back, little 11th sighed. A sadness that did not match his age appearing on his small face. The dust-covered memories from long ago began to stir. In the boundless darkness where not a trace of light could be seen, a consciousness began to emerge. At first it was dull and incomplete, just fumbling through the infinite darkness by instinct. After an unknown period of time had passed, that consciousness slowly became complete, and as it did so, it gradually became aware of its surroundings. It was as if it was trapped in a strange place, a place of nihility and emptiness where time flowed endlessly, and that made it feel lonely. It began to consciously search for a way out so that it could escape from this place that was keeping it trapped, but it did not even know why it wanted to leave. All its thoughts and actions were purely based on its instinct. It took action but to no avail, and after long years of suffering, it finally found the way out of that place. However, there was a tightly sealed gate blocking the way. It tried with all its might to break it down, but it was as if the strange gate had a complete suppressive power against it. No matter how hard it tried, it could not budge it in the slightest. Day after day, year after year, it gradually came to feel an emotion called despair. It understood that it was impossible for it to open the gate with its own power. Despair never came without reason. It only appeared when one's hopes were extinguished. For countless years it lived in this dark, lonely world, never understanding what despair meant, until the seed of hope was planted in it. Ironically, from the same gate it found, countless years of hard work came to nothing in the end, and the ultimate decision to give up was overwhelmingly frustrating. Perhaps it was destined to live in this dark world forever, it thought. That was until one day, it suddenly heard some strange noises when it was sleeping peacefully behind the gate. Until then, it had never even known that such a thing as sound existed in this world. Where it lived, not only was there no light, there was not even a hint of sound. Complete and utter silence. It was awoken from its slumber and listened to the sweet sound of that voice. At that time it had no idea what that voice was saying. It was not until later that it understood that the person was knocking softly at the gate, asking in a loud voice, "Is anyone there? Hello? Is anyone home?" The flames of hope were rekindled in the ashes of despair that had been tormenting it for countless years. It fought hard to make as much noise as possible from behind the gate, hoping that it could reach the outside. The person at the gate must have noticed it and said gleefully, "Someone's home? Could you please open the gate?" But how could it? It would have done so already if it could. Moreover, it could not even understand what the person was saying at the time. All it could do was keep on making noise in order to make its presence known, praying in its heart that the owner of that voice would not leave no matter what. It had been alone for countless years, and even if it could never leave this desolate world, it was happy as long as the voice outside that gate would not fade away, and if it could listen to it in silence. "Are you unable to get out?" The person at the gate began to ask again, seemingly having guessed its situation. The response was always some dull thumping sounds. "I understand now. You're trapped." It dawned on the person outside the gate. How pitiful. In that case, let me give you a hand. The next thing it felt was that the gate, which had always remained still, began to shake. It was taken aback yet excited at the same time. But in the end, the gate still did not open. After a long time, that pleasant-sounding voice emerged from outside the gate again. "This gate seems to be an innate supreme treasure. I am not able to open it with my current strength, but I feel that I should be able to open it once I get stronger. Can you wait in there for a while longer? I'll go and cultivate, then come back to you later." It had no idea what the voice was saying. All it knew was that the person left after speaking those words. Its hopes were crushed yet again, and it continued to sink into this dead world, where the boundless despair that enveloped it also continued to make it stronger. It was not until many years later that the voice appeared once more. Overjoyed, it made some noise at the gate as soon as possible. Sure enough, the voice that had once appeared noticed its presence and spoke a few words to it, then fiddled with the gate for a while before leaving again for the second time. But this time it no longer despaired. It vaguely understood what the person beyond the gate was trying to do, so even in the midst of the boundless world of desolation, it was full of hope and expectation. And so it waited and waited. In the endless years that followed, in the long river of time that was far too long to trace back, the two powerful existences, one inside and one outside, gradually became acquainted and formed a relationship of tacit understanding with each other. And as the person outside was talking to themselves, it got to learn their language and could already begin to communicate with them in a simple way. For it, this was an exceptionally wonderful experience, and the dark world in which it lived was no longer as dreary because in the midst of that darkness was a heart filled with hope. It remembered vividly the conversation that took place between them, even when that person outside the gate arrived for the 7th time to try and let it out but failed. "I've already cultivated into the peak of the 9th order, but how come this gate still won't open? How annoying! Annoying!" It repeated, not so much frustrated as happy. Its greatest wish was no longer to open the gate and leave this place, but to have someone to accompany it outside the gate and talk to it. That alone was enough to satisfy it. Being able to hear her speak filled it with so much joy each time that it would roll around behind that gate for days on end. I have to figure out a way, but the ninth order should already be the upper limit of the open heaven realm. What must I do to break through even further above that? The person behind the gate sounded worried. There was nothing it could do to help in these circumstances. It did not even know what the ninth order was or what the open heaven realm meant. This won't do, I have to go. The humans are currently in a bad situation since the great monsters are not easy to deal with. But rest assured, none of them are as powerful as I am. I'll come back for you once the situation stabilizes. Maybe then I'll be able to open this gate and let you out. Hearing that person's words, it knew that she would be leaving again. Even though it was reluctant to part with her, it couldn't stop her. In the end, it could only give a stiff reminder, take care, be safe. I will. The person outside the gate answered gleefully. The final wait felt unbearably long, seemingly lasting much longer than the times before. So it kept waiting at the gate, making some noise from time to time as if afraid that that person would not notice its presence when she arrived. Eventually, that person came. Listen, the world is such an amazing place. There's actually a thing called the universe furnace, and it appeared out of nowhere a few years ago, and I went inside. There was a really long river in there, and I have no idea where the source is or where it ends, so I call it the infinite river. What's a river? It asked. A river. It's hard to explain, but once you come out, you'll know if I bring you there. Besides the river, there were also big mountains. Oh, what else? Then I emulated the infinite river and refined a long river of my own, but it was still a far cry from that infinite river. Still, I am now much stronger than before, and I have a very strong feeling that I will be able to open the gate this time. And so, it responded, you say that every time you come here, but then you fail every time. The person outside sounded disgruntled. Wow, you've actually learned to insult me. That makes me mad. No, I wasn't trying to. It felt guilty and apologized in a panic. The person outside the gate giggled. The sound of her laughter sounded even better than before. I was just kidding. You're so gullible. After making sure that she wasn't really angry, it finally felt at ease. All right, I'm going to open the gate now, so stand back, or I might accidentally hurt you, said the person outside the gate. And so, it moved away from the gate as it was told, and the next thing it knew, the tightly closed gate began to rumble and shake even more violently than ever before. It was sure from this that the person on the other side had indeed increased their strength greatly, and became much stronger than previously. This also helped to give it more confidence in that person, thinking that there might actually be hope of the gate opening this time. Hope came quickly, and with the violent movement outside, the gate that had been tightly shut all this time parted to either side, gradually revealing an opening. When the light from the outside pierced through the darkness, it couldn't help but lose itself for a moment, staring in awe at the light that it had never seen before with both mind and body trembling. So this was the legendary light. Even a being born in darkness like it had an innate yearning and thirst for such light. Just this ray of light taught it that the world outside was countless times more exciting than the place where it was born. It won't open any more than this. The person outside the gate yelled in a strained voice. This is the limit. Quickly, get into my space-time river, I'll pull you out. As soon as she spoke, a great river came tumbling through the opening, pouring into the endless darkness. It dared not hesitate and plunged headlong into the river. Immediately afterwards, it felt a mysterious force drawing it towards the opening in the gate. Almost at the very moment that it exited the opening, the gate that had been opened closed shut again. The space-time river, which she had yet to fully withdraw, was even cut off, and part of it was left in the darkness forever. However, it was oblivious to such a thing happening. It was fighting its way up the river, and the moment that light filled its vision, it finally saw the figure that had been accompanying it outside the gate for countless years. There was a touch of crimson at the corner of that person's mouth. She wiped it away as if it were nothing. Grinning, she looked at the black blob that had floated out from her space-time river, and greeted it with familiarity. Hello. We meet at last. Sullivan. This just makes a mess of the whole story. So, it was not the 10 that found Mo. These two met beforehand. Not sure how I can fix this equals okay. So, I went back and changed it in a way that made Mu hesitate to say what had happened. Since we have Tsong also telling the same story as Mu, Let's just pretend that the 10 agreed upon this story so that Moo won't get blamed. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5976, Siblings. Speaking of which, I haven't asked for your name yet. My name is Moo, what's yours? It would never forget their first meeting. There was a touch of red blood on the corners of her lips as this quiet and gentle woman stood in the void, looking at it with a smile on her face. What is my name? It had no idea what its name was. It did not even realize that such a thing as a name existed in this world. Before meeting her, its world was nothing more than endless darkness and desolation. It was because it met her that its world now had sound, had expectations, and today light had also become a part of it. I don't know what my name is, it mumbled in reply. Inexplicably, a lowly feeling of shame took root in it, as if it had blasphemed her just by looking at her like this. No name, huh? Moo walked around it. Then she suddenly clapped her hands and smiled. I know. Seeing as how you're so dark, your name should be Mo. Mo, it murmured, and then it slowly beamed. My name is Mo. It had its own name now, and it was Moo who gave it to it. It was determined not to lose it in its life, and one day it would let everyone know its name. But soon it realized that its appearance was not quite the same as Moo's. Moo had arms and legs, a head and a body, and she was even wearing pretty clothes. She was such a pretty person. It also wished that it. As those thoughts ran through its mind, the round black blob, without a fixed shape, began to warp, gradually transforming until it looked just like Moo. Moo looked at it in surprise. You can even assume human form. But this won't do, you can't look like me. Mo was puzzled. Why? Moo kindly explained, because everyone is unique in this world. Mo didn't quite understand, but if Moo had said it, then it must be true. It was a shame that it couldn't look like her. She definitely had the most beautiful appearance in this world, it thought to itself. Then what should I look like? Mo asked. Just the way you were is good too. After a pause she added, but if you have to assume human form, then why don't I give you a hand? With what? Changing your appearance, Moo reached out her hands and pounced on it with a teasing grin on her face. Then she began to rub and shape it. Mo did not resist, allowing her to do as she pleased. Moo worked for quite a while before taking a few steps back and studying Mo carefully, after which she nodded in satisfaction. There, that'll be your look. Mo held out its hands and spread them out in front of itself, feeling confused as it looked at its small hands. Seeing its confusion, Moo took the initiative to explain. This is what my brother looked like. But he died when he was very young, so you can take his form from now on. Okay, Mo responded obediently. Moo then looked up at the profound source gate again and rushed over to it with excitement. This gate is a treasure. It ate a part of my space-time river, so I'll have to take it with me. She then turned to Mo. This is the door to your home, do you still want it? Mo waved his hand. I don't want it, you can have it. Who would even want such a thing? Moo nodded. In that case, I won't stand on ceremony. The space-time river was summoned again and wrapped itself around the strange gate. Perhaps because a piece of her space-time river was left inside the gate, this time Moo was able to collect it with ease. Let's go. Moo beckoned Mo and led him away into the distance. On the way, Mo asked the question that was on his mind. Moo, what is death? If a person dies, then we will never be able to see each other again, and that person will only live on in the memories of others. What is a little brother? Well, it's a sibling born from one's parents. Then, am I your little brother? Yes, you'll be my little brother from now on. You're my little brother too. That's not right, I'm your big sister. Sixth sister to be exact. What is a big sister? A big sister is a sibling born from one's own parents. But isn't that what a little brother is? Hey listen, a little brother should speak less because if he talks too much, his mouth will glue shut and he'll never be able to open it again. Shocked, Mo covered his mouth in a panic. Moo, where did this little friend come from? This is the one I told you about, the one who was shut behind that strange gate. You got him out of there? A crowd of people surrounded Moo and Mo, their eyes filled with scrutiny and curiosity. Mo clung to the corner of Moo's clothes and hid behind her. It had never known that so many people existed in this world, and that they all looked different. It was no wonder why Moo said that everyone was unique. Little friend, what's your name? Someone asked. Mo shook his head and did not answer, a timid look on his face. The speaker asked with pity in his voice. Is he mute? Mu laughed. Of course not, the child is just a little shy. There is something odd about this boy. I've never seen that power inside his body before. Mu, do you know what you've rescued? I'm not sure, but it was too pitiful to see him trapped behind that gate all alone. I couldn't just leave him after I discovered him. I just hope you know what you're doing. Rest assured. With how weak he is, he can't do much even if the power inside his body is a little strange. I'll keep an eye on him. That's good. Right now the great monsters are running amok and our people are in a tough spot. We can't afford to deal with any more trouble. It was Mo's first time meeting someone other than Mu, and after a brief conversation with them, he was led off to rest by Mu. In the days that followed they slowly came to know each other better, and it became clear that Mo was no mute. Mo had also figured out the relationship between these people and Mu. The 10 of them had such a close bond that they called each other siblings. Mu was ranked 6th out of the 10, which was why Mu asked him to call her 6th sister on the way here. As he was the youngest, he was affectionately called Little 11th by everyone. Mo also finally figured out what a big sister and little brother was. It even witnessed death. In those days, the great monsters of the early ancient era were committing atrocities all across the land, and the human race chose to stand up to them. Thus everything under the heavens was put under a constant baptism of blood and war. It was not known just how many humans had thrown away their lives in those battles. For a being who had been locked behind a gate all this while, it was a great shock for Mo to suddenly see such an unimaginable scene. Because of Mu, it began to think of itself as a human, and as it watched Mu and the 9 others busying about, it too wanted to help. It wanted to kill those early ancient era great monsters and give the humans a peaceful place to live. Mo began cultivating, but the human race's open heaven realm method did not suit it at all, and no matter how hard it tried, it could not raise its cultivation. That was until one day it unwittingly felt the power surging deep inside the bodies of some of the humans, and almost instinctively, it drew that invisible and formless power into its body, refining and absorbing it. It actually felt as if it had grown a little stronger. Mo was both pleasantly surprised and horribly terrified by this discovery. It was pleasantly surprised to have found a way to cultivate, but also terrified because it had never heard of this kind of cultivation before. It went to look for Mu at once to ask for clarification. However, Mu was out fighting at that time. By the time she returned, it was several dozen years later, and Mo had grown significantly stronger. Mo could not forget the joy on Mu's face. How happy she was that it became stronger. The words that reached its mouth were stuck there, but Mo suddenly realized that this was not so bad. As long as Mu was happy, what else mattered? Having found the right path to cultivate, Mo's strength soared by leaps and bounds. One day, it would finally become strong enough to step onto the battlefield. Mu did not give it any preferential treatment just because of who it was, and Mo simply participated in its first battle against monster race as the most ordinary of human soldiers. After all, Mu was one of the 10 commanders of the human race of that era, and had more important things to do than babysit. It was impossible to keep Mo by her side and watch over it at all times. During Mo's first battle, the army that it was in was ambushed by the early ancient era's great monsters and torn to pieces. The casualties they suffered were severe. Mu rushed to provide support when she received the news, but by the time she reached the battlefield, the fighting was over. Originally, she thought that Mo was already no more, but what she saw instead stunned her. The human race, which had been at an absolute disadvantage in terms of military strength, had won the battle at a huge cost, with just 30% of their forces surviving in the end. Mo stood in the middle of the bloody sea of corpses, with many of the early ancient era great monsters nearby bowing down in submission as the cheers of the surviving soldiers came like a tide. It was only after this that Mu learnt that Mo had used its power at the most critical moment, causing monster race masters to change sides, leading to their eventual victory. It was only now that she realized the special nature of Black Ink's strength, which seemed to have the ability to twist the mind and spirit of living beings. Mo had no choice but to confess to Mu about its years of cultivation, and that subduing monster race masters with its power was just an idea that happened to crop up. It had never done it before. For the first time, Mu reprimanded him. Mo panicked, not knowing what it had done wrong, but seeing Mu's reaction, it knew it had to have done something wrong. After scolding Mu couldn't help but sigh. saying that it wasn't its fault before leaving with a grimace. As it watched Mu's somewhat sullen back, Mo vowed to itself that it would never use that method of cultivation again, nor would it ever use its power to subdue any living creature. However, things rarely went as one wished in life. As the battle between the humans and monster race raged on, the fighting only became more and more fierce. Even if the human race had the 10 martial ancestors, the early ancient era great monsters had a considerable number of powerful masters of their own. Things were looking increasingly dire for the human race, and there were even many who had submitted to the monster race, willingly becoming their slaves in order to survive. Battle after battle, Mo, who had witnessed countless deaths, could no longer resist the urge to use its power once more, twisting the hearts of the humans who turned against them. Not one person on the entire battlefield was spared during that event. Even those of the monster race were subjugated by it. In that battle, the human race army, which had not seen glory for a long time, received an overwhelming victory. Martial Peak Chapter 5977 The Right to Live. Once the darkness was unleashed, it was difficult to seal it up again. While the 10 martial ancestors were fighting against the early ancient era great monsters at the forefront of the battlefield, Missouri subordinated batch after batch of helpers, leading the human race at the back and obtaining victory in every battle. As time passed, it became stronger and stronger. Mo had achieved what it vowed to do back then, to spread its name and make itself known to all of the humans. There was not much that it wanted from this. Mo just wished to end this war as soon as possible. Then Mu would have more time to accompany it again. It was willing to use any means to achieve that goal, bestowing great power on the humans who feared and avoided the war so that they could become fearless. It even began to spread its power to the various universe worlds, so that those people could become strong as quickly as possible. All its hard work and dedication had been worthwhile. Mu and the other 10 martial ancestors slayed many of the early ancient era great monsters at the battlefront, achieving a full victory. Meanwhile, the human race army that Mo led was also very successful on each battlefield. The living space for monster race was constantly being shrunk. The human race was about to usher in their final victory. Mo was overjoyed to see Mu again, whom it had not been able to see for many years. With great excitement, it told her about his efforts and achievements over the years, not noticing the troubled look in Mu's eyes. Mo made a wish in front of Mu, that they would never have to be separated again once the war was over. Rubbing its head, Mu agreed. From then on, Mu would bring Mo along wherever she went. Mo was no longer allowed to use the power it had used before, and it was no longer allowed to set foot on the battlefield, but it did not care. Compared to being extolled by countless humans and bending the disobedient ones to its will, Mo preferred simply staying quietly by Mu's side. The war finally came to an end and the human race emerged as the final victors, becoming the masters of the universe while the early ancient era great monsters were almost slaughtered to extinction. Even though there were still great monsters left, it was no longer possible for them to stir up any waves. Mu took Mo on a journey to witness the beauty and peace of the universe, acting like true brother and sister. During that journey, Mu showered it with nothing but care. Mo felt that even if it died at that time, it would have no regrets. Many years later, Mo would ask itself many times why it really didn't die in that beautiful memory, because its life would have been perfect if that was the case. One day, Mu said she would bring it home, to visit the place where it was born. Though it was reluctant to return to that place that had trapped it for so many years, Mo could not deny her since it was Mu who requested it. The two of them traveled together, returning to that ancient land. The other 9 big brothers had already arrived and were waiting for them. After Mu led Mo there, it keenly sensed a massive array being activated, sealing the void in all directions. Mo did not understand what was going on, until Mu told him the truth. Mo never would have thought that Mu would one day trick it like this. Shock, anger, resentment, all sorts of complicated emotions overwhelmed it. The reason Mu let it here was just so they could suppress and seal it here again, and that last journey would be its final fond experiences. Mo's heart felt as if it had been stabbed. The dependence and trust it once had turned into grief, causing Mo to lose its rationale for a moment. The power that had been built up over the years was released, and Mo's mind became completely twisted. Under Mo's influence, all the beings previously corrupted by his power were turned into slaves. The human race, which had only been at peace for a few years, was once again thrust into an endless war. Inside the small house, Emo sighed faintly as its small figure grew rapidly, transforming into a handsome young man with delicate features in the blink of an eye. He got up, walked out of the house and looked up at the sky, his gaze absent as his mind drifted. Such an innocent memory from so long ago. Mu came out of the kitchen, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at him with a faint smile. Are you leaving? Emo turned his head and looked at Mu with a complicated gaze before nodding gently. Mu said to him, all these years it was Sixth Sister who wronged you. Emo raised his hand to interrupt her, smiling back, you did the right thing, Sixth Sister. Huh. Mu cocked her head at it in confusion. Emo said, I was too young then, mistakenly believing that I had full control of that power, but it proved to be too much for me to grasp. If you hadn't suppressed and sealed me back then, I'm afraid the human race would be no more. Mu was stunned for a moment, then as if understanding something, her face paled slightly. You mean, Emo sighed, that power is the root. I am only its consciousness that has been born through many long years of accumulation. Even though you have taught me about all the wonderful things in the universe, in the end not everything is good in this world. No matter the kind of consciousness it birthed, its power will continue to grow, and one day even that consciousness will become its slave. When that happens, only one instinct will remain, to conquer and enslave everything. Just as the birth of the Black Ink cult was inevitable in this world, so too was all this predestined. Hearing those words from it, Mu finally understood. So when the power was suppressed and sealed once more, it instead led you to rediscover yourself. Exactly, Emo grinned. Then now, Emo shook its head. It will all return soon. Sixth Sister, you have already fulfilled your promise. For that I thank you. Emo looked up at Mu, tears faintly welling in his eyes. Mu promised back then that she would accompany him forever and keep him by her side wherever she went, and she had done exactly that and more. While she was alive, she was constantly watching over the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, and even in her death, the shadows she left behind continued to keep Emo company. Mu tried to make one last effort. If you like, we could go on like this. Emo shook his head sadly. I can't stop it, and besides, since I was born, I too should fight for my right to live. These words caused Mu's heart to clench. Every living being had the right to live since birth, to pursue the good things in life, but what if the existence of this being was in itself a sin? Emo looked at Mu with a deep gaze, as if he wanted to brand the figure before him into the deepest part of his mind, into his life, never to be forgotten. He then murmured softly, besides, a world without Sixth Sister no longer needs to exist. Emo opened his arms as if to embrace the entire world. Winds rose and clouds surged. A black ray of light suddenly descended and entered Mo's body, causing his aura to swell explosively. This was followed by a second, then a third. All the inhabitants of Dawn City looked up in shock, only to see an endless stream of black light coming from nowhere in the sky, falling incessantly towards a certain spot in the city where a terrifying aura was surging. The inside of the holy temple of the Light Spirit religion was a chaotic mess. The Order Lords wanted to go and find out what was going on, but they could barely even move their bodies when they felt that terrible power. Everyone's eyes were filled with horror. The turbulent wind blew the small house down, but Mu stood still, completely untouched as Emo had enveloped her in a force that was protecting her. Oh! In the 2639th world, Yongkai managed to repel the attacking Black Ink disciples together with Mu's shadow, but not without difficulty. Just as he was about to use the profound source gate to suppress and seal Mo's source piece, the seal opened by itself before he could even act, and the piece inside turned into a black light that rushed into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Yongkai looked on in astonishment at what had just happened. Mu's shadow paled and she raised her hand, pressing her palm against Yongkai's chest before urging, "He has woken up. Quickly go to the primordial world, that is the source of my power. Find the shadow I left there and she will tell you what to do." Emo has awakened. Despite knowing that this would happen, Yongkai could not help but feel his chest tightening when the time finally came. Was it finally time to face the strongest existence in this universe? Yongkai then silently comforted himself. Somewhere between 30% and 40% of Mo's source should be suppressed and sealed, so in other words, its black ink strength had also been weakened by that much. Even so, was there anyone among them who could be a match for Mo? If there was no way to defeat Mo, then all their previous efforts would be in vain. It was too late to ask any more questions though, so under the pull of Mu's power, he disappeared in a flash of light. By this time, the battle outside the primordial heaven source grand restriction had subsided. Zhang Ruoxi had arrived, bringing with her not only the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race personal guard, but also a large army of hundreds of millions from the Small Stone Race soldiers. The Black Ink clan at the opening of the grand restriction no longer dared to come out to fight, so how could the ones left outside be any match for the humans? The Small Stone Race regiments cut through the battlefield one by one, firstly dividing the Black Ink clan army before gradually pecking away at their forces. With the 2 giant spirit gods rampaging through the battlefield, the Black Ink clan army was soon decimated. If this were the past, then the Black Ink clan army might have fled if they were being so steeply suppressed. But this place was the primordial heaven source grand restriction, where the source of the Black Ink clan was, so where could they flee to? If they fought with their lives on the line, they could at least weaken the enemy and take some pressure off those still inside the grand restriction. With this consideration in mind, the only end for those outside the grand restriction was death. The human race soldiers who were still recuperating watched this scene from afar with mixed feelings. What should have been a certain defeat had been turned around by the Small Stone Race army, but this victory did not dictate the final outcome. It may take an even more grueling and brutal battle to actually win this war. Kacha, suddenly a strange sound came from the void. Before the human race masters could figure out what was happening, they heard Wu Kuang's grave voice call out, "Watch out! The grand restriction is about to break." Kacha, the sound began to overlap more and more. The human race army stopped for a moment before immediately getting into formation. As countless pairs of eyes watched on, cracks appeared in the endless darkness of the void, the lines becoming as dense as a spider web in the blink of an eye. A figure had also emerged from somewhere in the grand restriction, hurriedly moving towards the human race army. It was Wu Kuang, who had been standing guard at the grand restriction for thousands of years. Martial Peak Chapter 5978 The Way Forward. As the primordial heaven source grand restriction was about to break, it was pointless for Wu Kuang to stay connected to it any longer. In fact, he would even have to suffer the backlash if he remained. So, the moment he realized that the situation was irreversible, he left the grand restriction as soon as possible. With this, he could at least ensure that he would not be injured. As for Yang Kai, who still remained inside, he was no longer able to provide much help to him regardless. What caught the attention of the many Ninth Order masters, however, was the aura that Wu Kuang was displaying at this moment. Wu Kuang's existence was known only to a few human race masters. They knew that he was sent here by Yang Kai to guard the primordial heaven source grand restriction, but no one knows how strong he was, not even Yang Kai. After all, when he sent Wu Kuang here, he was only in the 7th Order open heaven realm. Even though he later broke through to the 8th Order and then the 9th Order, no one had any close contact with him, so they could only speculate on his strength. At this moment, Wu Kuang's strength was finally revealed to the world. He was at the peak of the 9th Order. He was even stronger when compared to Xiao Xiao and Wu Qing, the oldest veteran masters of the human race. In the situation they were facing, having another peak 9th Order master would be of great help. However, something unexpected happened before the humans could even rejoice. Wu Kuang's departure from the grand restriction sped up its destruction. Even more cracks appeared, and soon, the primordial heaven source grand restriction, which had persisted for millions of years, shattered like a broken mirror. Glowing dots of light filled the void, and as the light dissipated, boundless black filled one's vision. The blackness seemed to possess a life of its own, writhing and rolling as the auras of an uncountable number of beings could be felt inside of it. Before the grand restriction broke, the Black Ink clan could only leave through that one opening, so even at the height of the Human Crusade Forces crisis, not too many Black Ink clan reinforcements could get out at once. This allowed them to maintain a degree of control over the situation. But now things have changed. With the complete destruction of the grand restriction, all of the Black Ink clansmen hiding inside of it were instantly released. No one had any idea just how many Black Ink clansmen were still hidden in that abyss of darkness. The only thing that the humans could feel glad about was the fact that they had killed many of the Black Ink clan masters before, which relieved some of the pressure they had to face at this moment. The human race army waited with bated breath, but to their surprise, not a single Black Ink clansman emerged from the sea of Black Ink strength even after some time had passed. They seemed to be fearful of something. Soon the human race masters realized what it was. It was Zhang Ruoxi that the Black Ink clan was afraid of. The power she had shown earlier was beyond comprehension, surpassing even that of the giant spirit gods, allowing her to kill royal lords like she was cutting melons or chopping vegetables. At the moment, Zhang Ruoxi stood at the very forefront of the small stone race army. Despite standing alone, her presence was still intimidating enough that the Black Ink clan did not dare to move rashly. Even though the white wings spread behind her back were small in the face of the darkness that covered everything the eye could see, the light emitting from her was far too bright for any darkness to truly cover. The Ninth Order masters could not help but feel a little embarrassed at this. If Zhang Ruoxi had not soared across the skies to their aid, their second crusade would have already failed. If that were to be the case, then they would have no choice but to retreat through the path that Yang Kai had prepared for them, to follow him to seek a new life in a new world. But who would know what that new world would be like? In front of the massive enemy army, Zhang Ruoxi remained calm and steady. On the other hand, in the void before her, the Black Ink strength surged. The Black Ink clan were too terrified to even move. The power of a single person could actually be so terrifying. All of a sudden, Zhang Ruoxi's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she stared into the depths of the black abyss. Seemingly noticing something, her wings flapped behind her and she turned into a stream of white light, instantly disappearing into the sea of darkness. From afar, a voice reached Mi Jingluan's ears. "Sir is inside. I'll go and check on him." In an instant, the Black Ink ocean became even more agitated. It was clear that Zhang Ruoxi was not merely going over to check out the situation. Inside the void that was filled with all the Black Ink clansmen, she couldn't reach Yang Kai without cutting a bloody path through them. In the primordial world, the aftermath of the chaos in Dawn City was still lingering. Just now, everyone saw a figure at the edge of the city soaring into the skies before disappearing without a trace, and after that person disappeared, the black lights that fell from the sky also disappeared. Even though the unusual phenomenon was gone, the panic it caused would not ease for some time. The Saintess and Li Fei Yu looked in that direction together, a pondering look in their eyes. They knew that the first Saintess lived in seclusion at that location, and they had a sneaking suspicion that what they saw was related to her. Shortly after Mo departed, Yang Kai returned to this place, drawn by the power of Mu's shadow. The first thing he saw was Mu, who was standing in front of the small house. "Senior!" Yang Kai shouted. Mu turned to look in his direction, seemingly expecting him. "You're here. Where's little 11th? Yang Kai looked around, though he had a vague guess when he did not see his small figure around. "Sure enough," Mu replied. "He has awakened, and the sealed source pieces have all returned one after the other. This universe world cannot withstand his power, but he was unwilling to destroy it, so he has left my space-time river already." Yang Kai nodded lightly. "I understand. The final battle was upon him, and he had done all that he could. Whether they won or lost would depend on the final fight. Senior, since Mo has awakened, it is time for me to go. The power that the human race has at this time may not be enough to hold him back, but we will do our best. The last shadow of yours I met told me to come back and see you, and that you would show me the way forward, so I hope that Senior can enlighten me." "You have already found your way forward." Mu looked at him with a smile in her gaze. "Huh." Yang Kai did not understand. "You've chosen the same path that I have," Mu added. Yang Kai was thoughtful. Condensing 10,000 grandaos in one's own body and manifesting the space-time river? Mu nodded lightly. "As I told you before, everyone has their own space-time river, which starts flowing from the day they are born and ends at the day they die. However, since the start of time, few have been able to manifest their space-time river. I was the first while you are the second." Saying so, she suddenly asked Yang Kai a question. "The open heaven realm method cultivated by the human race is flawed. You must have noticed, yes?" Yang Kai nodded. "The Ninth Order is the limit of the open heaven realm method, but I had a vague feeling that the Ninth Order open heaven realm is not the end of martial Tao. There should be a higher realm above the Ninth Order, above the open heaven realm." "There is indeed a higher realm above the Ninth Order." Mu gave him an affirmative answer. Young Kai was astonished. Has Senior reached it? Embarrassedly, Mu shook her head. If I had reached it, the human race would not be in this predicament today. Even though I have not reached it, I did touch upon it. Young Kai could not help but praise her in his heart, as expected of the strongest among the martial ancestors. Song told him back then that the martial ancestors were still only in the 9th order, but they were stronger as they had gone further along the path. It was just that they had still yet to leave the bounds of the open heaven realm. However, Mu told him today that she had touched the profound realm above the open heaven realm. Even if she had only touched it and not reached it, it was still an extraordinary achievement. Mu recalled an old memory and slowly began. The open heaven realm method was born out of necessity at a time when the human race was in a difficult situation. The early ancient era great monsters were rampaging throughout the universe, and without the open heaven realm method, the human race would have been nothing but food and slaves for them. During that time, the heavens were quietly beginning to favor the human race, so it devised a way out for them, the open heaven realm method. Only with it can the human race give rise to a constant stream of masters, which gave them the capital to contend with the early ancient era great monsters. However, even the heavens have their selfishness. For example, the primordial world. Once one's cultivation surpasses the immortal ascension realm, they would receive its repulsion and hostility. That is the selfishness of the primordial world. One can also see it as its instinct for self-preservation. The universe is not unchanging as its blessings were first concentrated on the divine spirits before moving to the early ancient era monster race, then finally to us, the human race. Over time, the 3 races became the favorite of the heavens and were given the right to dominate all beneath it. She turned to Yang Kai. Why do you think this happened? Yang Kai pondered for a moment. If one race becomes too powerful, then they are no longer fearful of the heavens, and once the power they hold becomes strong enough to oppose it, it creates a sense of crisis in the heavens. Hence, there will be a transfer of its blessing. He had considered such a thing before, so he was able to give a quick answer to Mu's question. Mu nodded. Precisely. The universe lives and it has its own will. Principles are a part of its will, but it is not the same as us living beings. It is above us as all beings are under its will. If any power that surpasses its control were to come to be, it would move to remedy the situation, but it does not take action itself, and it certainly does not have the power to do so. So it uses the power of other beings to restore order from chaos, and ensure that everything remains on the predetermined path. This is reflected in history from long ago, when the early ancient era monster race overthrew the divine spirits, and when the human race freed itself from the slavery of the early ancient era monster race. But Senior, what does this have to do with my path? Yang Kai looked perplexed. Mu continued, naturally it is all related. Because the open heaven realm method was a gift willed by the heavens, it is also a kind of shackle. It is impossible to break free from these shackles of the open heaven realm method by using the open heaven realm method. In fact, there is only one place in existence that the heavens will cannot cover, and everything that happens and is obtained there is not under the control of the heavens. Yang Kai's eyes lit up and he blurted out, the universe furnace. He could just about understand what Mu was getting at now. I've never understood what the universe furnace is, but it is definitely a place beyond the heavens' influence, Mu asserted. Yang Kai thought to himself, of course the heavens can't interfere with it because the universe itself was created inside the universe furnace. It could even be considered the origin of the heavens. He had coincidentally seen the true face of the universe furnace, and witnessed the process of it taking in chaos and splitting heaven and earth apart. He wanted to discuss all this with Mu, but time was running out and he could not figure out a way to explain everything in a timely manner, so he had no choice but to endure the urge for now. You and I have ventured into the universe furnace, and we have seen the infinite river that flows through it, which led to us condensing our own space-time rivers. Mu turned to Yang Kai. The space-time river is your path forward. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5979, Final Gift. The space-time river is my path forward. Yang Kai pondered. Senior means to say, the reason why I have placed a barrier outside of my space-time river is because I knew no one other than those who have also condensed their own space-time river have the power to save the universe. For those who do not have that ability, it would not benefit them in any way even if they found my space-time river. Since that is so, it would be better to cut off the hope for those who approach sooner to avoid them having to go through even greater despair later. Mu had hidden her space-time river in the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, and when Yang Kai was brought to it under Wu Kuang's lead, he felt something blocking him when he tried to enter. However, he was able to pass through easily. He thought at first that it was because of his identity as a human, but it was only later that he discovered this was because he had also condensed his space-time river. If not for that, no other human would have been able to enter this place, not even if they were in the Ninth Order. To the humans of the primordial world, the so-called Holy Sun was the savior of this world, but the savior that Mu spoke of was someone who could save the 3,000 worlds. To defeat Mo, the strength of the Ninth Order open heaven realm alone is not enough. Mo can only be defeated when someone who can break through the shackles of the Ninth Order and reach the next realm, a realm which I was only a step away from reaching. Yang Kai hurriedly asked, "So what is the next realm? Why was Senior unable to make that breakthrough?" Mu laughed bitterly before looking at him. "As for what exactly the next realm is, even I am not sure. But as for why I did not manage to reach it, it is because my space-time river is incomplete." Yang Kai could not help but become lost in thought, recalling the wide and beautiful river that he saw before. Even that massive river is incomplete? Then what should a complete space-time river look like? In the first place, what makes hers incomplete? And what sort of problem did she encounter for her space-time river to remain incomplete? Is there no way to fix it? Yang Kai asked. Logically speaking, the space-time river was a condensation and manifestation of one's comprehension of 10,000 Tao strengths. Even if it were to be damaged in the midst of an intense battle, there should be a chance for it to recover as long as the foundations of one's grand Taos remained. The only possibility that would lead to the complete inability for the space-time river to be recovered was if the foundation of one's grand Taos got destroyed. Mu shook her head. It is not possible to fix. Long past memories tumbled around in her mind, leading her to recall the events of that day, and the corners of her mouth could not help but lift up into a smile. When the profound source gate cut off a section of her space-time river, she did not think much of it then. She was immersed in her joy of finally rescuing Mo from behind that closed gate. She originally thought that she only needed to open the door again to retrieve that part of her space-time river. Who could have expected that when she did open the profound source gate, that there would be nothing behind it, only an endless pool of desolation and darkness. But even then, she had not realized the severity of the problem. Not until her space-time river continued to grow and her cultivation became more robust. When she tried to break through to the next realm, it was then that she helplessly realized that the damage to her space-time river had cut off all her hopes of taking that final step. If that incident had not happened back then, she should have already broken through the confines of the open heaven realm and reached that mysterious realm. Did she regret it? Not once. She only blamed herself for not teaching Mo properly when she saved him from the profound source gate. By the time she found out about what happened later, the situation was already too far gone to be salvaged. And compared to that, it was not as if she was completely without any harvests. If the profound source gate had not devoured a part of her space-time river, she would not have been able to refine it so easily. It was one of the most profound innate supreme treasures after all. As she dispelled the memories from her mind, Mu withdrew her smile and looked seriously at Yang Kai. You have already set foot on the path, and you will reach the endpoint sooner or later where you will have to open up the new way forward. But not much time is left for you now. I hope that you can achieve what I failed to back then. At once, the pressure that Yang Kai felt weighing on him was like a mountain, but he still gave a firm answer. Junior will try his best. Mu smiled and walked up to him. Just like the other shadows that Yang Kai encountered in the many universe worlds, she gently pressed her hand to his chest. Go, put an end to it all. The human race has suffered since the late ancient era until now. As the favored children of heaven, it is time for us to have our own peaceful world to live in. The reason why Yang Kai came back here was because the previous shadow had sent him here, but after talking for so long, Yang Kai still did not get a clear answer from Mu. What did he have to do in order to defeat the current Mo? Mu did tell him that he had to make a breakthrough to the next realm, but he had not even reached the door to the next realm yet. How could he make a quick breakthrough at such an urgent time? Mu continued to smile at him as her figure gradually started to fade. I left you something. You will find out what to do soon enough. As she disappeared, Yang Kai's body rose involuntarily into the sky and soon plunged into the vast and beautiful space-time river. This time, however, he did not feel anything pulling him. He had traveled across about 90% of the 3,000 universe worlds in order to suppress and seal the pieces of Mo's source, and he had succeeded in sealing more than 1,000 of them. Right now, Mo had already awoken. The source pieces that Yang Kai was not able to suppress and seal had returned to Mo, so there was no longer any point in visiting those universe worlds. Yang Kai's body bobbed up and down in the river as the currents inside of it stirred. Then, a strange feeling suddenly arose in him. That was, he felt an indescribable sense of affinity and recognition by the space-time river that should belong to Mu. What's more, it seemed as if he was able to mobilize its power. Yang Kai was astonished by this discovery. This was, after all, Mu's space-time river, the culmination of her lifelong cultivation. Even if Mu had departed from the world of the living long ago, even if he himself had his own space-time river, it did not make sense for him to feel this affinity and recognition from it. Scenes flashed before his eyes, scenes of him in each universe world at the moment when he parted with Mu. Whether Yang Kai managed to seal the source pieces or not in each universe world, as long as Mu's shadow still existed, he had not failed to find her and bring her away with him because he was unwilling to see this senior who had fought alone for countless years continue to wait and suffer endlessly. The way he brought her away was through taking the last shreds of energy from her shadows into his own body. Each one was a moment in Mu's lifetime. Mu had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces, suppressing and sealing them in different universe worlds, and she had also separated herself into the same number of shadows in order to remain by the source piece's side. Every person had their own space-time river from the moment that they were born, and it ended at their last breath. Each shadow injected the last of their strength into Yang Kai's body, which was equivalent to granting Mu's existence, during the time used to conceive the shadow, to Yang Kai. During this long journey, the number of shadows that Yang Kai had encountered was over 2000. In other words, out of Mu's many shadows, he had gained the recognition of at least 70% of them. Yang Kai finally understood what it was that Mu had left him. She had left him her own space-time river. With the approval and acknowledgement of most of its owner, Yang Kai could now refine her space-time river and use it for himself. This was Mu's last resort, as well as her final gift. A tidal wave of grief crashed over Yang Kai, overwhelming his entire being. However, he had no time for sorrow. Mo had awakened and escaped, so the human race was in danger of being annihilated at any moment. He had to receive Mu's gift as soon as possible and strengthen himself. However, Yang Kai was acutely aware that despite all of the hidden hands that Mu left behind, it was still not inexhaustible. She must not have thought about the problems with her own cultivation. Mu had gained enlightenment about her own space-time river at a point when she was no longer improving in her cultivation back then. But Yang Kai was different. He was merely at the peak of the 8th order when he trained inside of the universe furnace, before he even took the risk to use the 3-self source reconstitution art to break through to the 9th order. It was there where Yang Kai had condensed his own space-time river, long before reaching the peak of the 9th order. When the final war between the human race and Black Ink clan broke out at the No Return Pass, the time left for Yang Kai to cultivate was cut short, and even if he did borrow the power of the 2 open heaven realm cradles and diligently cultivated with the help of his space-time river at every opportunity, there was still a considerable distance left between his current cultivation and the peak of the 9th order. The reason Mu gifted Yang Kai with her space-time river was most likely in hopes that Yang Kai could borrow its power in order to break through the shackles of the open heaven realm method and reach the mysterious next realm in one step. As long as he could reach that realm, defeating Mo would not be an issue. But right now, the situation was that Yang Kai's cultivation was still a great distance from the peak of the 9th order, and even if he did receive Mu's gift, it was impossible for him to make a breakthrough in such a short amount of time. Mu's gift would undoubtedly help boost the power of his Tao strengths greatly, but it could not help to grow his cultivation. Mu might have considered that, or she might not have. Regardless, she had already done all that she could. As one of the 10 martial ancestors, she had left absolutely everything she had behind for her juniors of the human race. After working out Mu's plans, Yang Kai calmed his mind and summoned his own space-time river directly inside of Mu's. If Mu's space-time river was like a coiling grand dragon, Then Yonkai's spacetime river was like a little snake. At the very best, it would be a big python. There was simply no contest. However, when Yonkai's spacetime river appeared, the waters stirring fiercely around him began to gather around it and merged into it, increasing the size and volume of Yonkai's spacetime river. Yonkai could not help but grunt as his mind felt dizzy from the phenomenon. He was almost overwhelmed by all of the mysterious sensations that were crashing down on him, as if to drown out his very being. The spacetime river was a condensation of many Tao strengths with spacetime Tao strength as its foundation, and the river's water was all a manifestation of those Tao strengths. With the recognition of Mu's many shadows, Yonkai did not feel any resistance when he was refining her spacetime river, but its mass was simply too great, a manifestation of Mu's great attainments and insights into all the grand Taos, and all of it was being stuffed into Yonkai. A sense of crisis came over him at that instant. Yonkai realized that if he failed to withstand the impact of these Tao strengths, something terrible would happen to him. So overall for Mu and Mo's story, Mu and Mo met beforehand. A piece of Mu's spacetime river got caught behind the gate. Mo met the other 9 through Mu, and they became close enough to be called Little 11th or Shao Shuri. While fighting the war, Mo tried to help out and corrupted his allies and enemies. The 10 found out that they fucked up and planned to seal it. Mu made a plan on how to do it. After the war, she would take Mo around and sightsee. Meanwhile, the other 9 would build the Grand Restriction. Once it was time, she led Mo inside and they trapped it. Mo, unhappy, started the Great War of that era in an attempt to free itself. I guess during that time the 10 agreed on this lie to say that they met Mo instead of Mu freeing Mo, else the other humans would target Mu in anger. Sometime later, war got pushed back to create the Spiritless Land. Mu went into the Grand Restriction. I believe she was trying to find the missing part of her spacetime river. There she found out that a part of Mo was still inside the gate. Doubt she was able to open the gate fully. But she found a better way to seal away its strength in hopes of defeating Mo anyways. She found out that she can't go above the open heaven realm. Since the spacetime river is connected to one's life and death, she made the preparations to help the next guy get stronger. She had to kill herself. Else the spacetime river would not be able to split from her and be left behind. Well, that's how I made sense of the story so far. Martial Peak Chapter 5980. It's you. Yonkai had a nagging feeling that if he failed to withstand the onslaught of Tao strengths washing over him right now, he would become part of the Tao strengths, and both spacetime rivers would collapse. To be one with the Tao. A strange thought occurred to Yonkai. This is an obstacle in the path of cultivation. All is well if I make it through, but if we don't, all is lost. So, this is the hurdle that must be faced when one reaches the pinnacle of the martial Tao. He quickly used the power of the soul-warming lotus to protect his consciousness. The situation improved ever so slightly, but the soul-warming lotus, which had been infallible in the past, could not be of any decisive help this time around. If one were to describe Mu's final gift as a feast, then the soul-warming lotus was stomach medicine. In the past, whenever Yonkai's soul was threatened by outside forces, the soul-warming lotus would keep it well protected. It ensured that Yonkai's soul did not get destroyed and his consciousness remained intact. However, that was not the case with Mu's gift. The Tao strengths within her spacetime river were not poison. On the contrary, they were the greatest of supplements. The situation came down to whether Yonkai could digest everything he had been given or not. The soul-warming lotus could not do much in this situation, as it was Yonkai who took the initiative to refine and absorb everything inside Mu's spacetime river. It was up to him to take the many Tao strengths in for himself. Yonkai's spacetime river, which had been like a snake earlier, was rapidly expanding. As it grew bigger, its speed of devouring and refining increased as well. A sudden surge of pressure made Yonkai's skin split apart and blood poured out at once. It was hard for him to withstand everything with his current strength. Not daring to hesitate for even a breath, a sonorous dragon roar rang out and a massive dragon manifested. Now that Yonkai had assumed his dragon form, the burden on his body eased a lot. However, the shining golden light of the divine dragon looked different now. The concentrated Tao strength circled Yonkai's dragon form in an attempt to transform him into Tao strengths, but his dragon scales tensed up to block the encroachment. Dragon roars kept ringing out inside the meandering spacetime river. Meanwhile, outside the spacetime river, Mo growled softly as his source pieces, which had been suppressed and sealed in the past, were returning to him. His power was increasing at an alarming rate. While Yang Kai was struggling with himself, Mo calmly observed the situation occurring inside the spacetime river. The source pieces he regained were the ones that had been taken away from him in the past, so he was simply reabsorbing them now. Still, he had not fully regained everything yet. Instead of hatred or resentment, though, Mo merely had a complicated look on his face. Just as he had said in his final conversation with Mu, although his mere existence brought harm, since he had gained sentience, he had the right to fight to survive. It was not fair for him to be locked behind a door forever. Black ink strength was the root of his existence, and his consciousness had simply emerged from it. Even without Mo, something else that was similar would have come out of the darkness eventually. "I should thank you," Mo murmured as he cupped his fist lightly, reabsorbing all of the remaining source pieces. In the past, he could barely control his own strength as it had grown beyond his ability to manipulate. However, Yang Kai's earlier efforts had sealed over 30% of his source strength behind the profound source gate. Although this weakened Mo's maximum strength, it came with the silver lining of granting him far better control of what strength remained. Thus, in Mo's current state, he was even more threatening than when he was at the peak of his power. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion directed at the river as he snarled, "Come out." He did not want anyone to touch what Mu left behind. Previously, to protect the primordial world from destruction, Mo even voluntarily left the primordial world and jumped out of the spacetime river as he feared that his overwhelming strength would destroy it. The spacetime river was the final piece of Mu that remained. A dragon roar escaped from the spacetime river. Yang Kai, who was busy refining the Tao's strengths, suddenly felt something grabbing onto him to drag him out of the river. He did not sense Mo's presence, but he was certain it was the latter's doing. All along, Yang Kai had been curious to know the extent of Mo's power, about what the legendary creation realm was like. At last, Yang Kai personally experienced just how terrifying Mo's might was. Mo's strength remained this immense despite the two of them being separated by two space-time rivers. Without the space-time rivers, Yang Kai estimated that he, a ninth-order master and a divine dragon, would not be able to withstand more than 3 of Mo's attacks before he perished. "I can't let him drag me out." There was a chance for him to put up a fight if he remained hidden inside Mu's spacetime river, but if he did get pulled out, he was doomed to die. Yang Kai knew what he had to do, and with a roar, he began harnessing the strength of the spacetime rivers in a frenzied manner to attempt to cut off the force that was constraining him. Even though the force came from outside the rivers, it could not be cut off so easily. Furthermore, Yang Kai could not wield his full strength in his present condition. His spacetime river was busy refining the Tao strengths from Mu's river, and as the complex and mysterious mix of Tao strengths surged, much of his focus was diverted to protecting his soul to avoid being refined into Tao strengths himself. Both parties had their reasons for holding back, so for the moment it was a stalemate. Outside the river, Mo's eyes flashed with surprise. He did not think that Yang Kai would be able to put up a fight, but he doubled down and called out impatiently, "Come out on your own, or else I don't mind heading in myself." Mo did not want to destroy the final memory he had of Mu. He knew that some shadows of Mu remained inside the spacetime river, so he wanted to preserve them. If he entered the spacetime river, he was undoubtedly going to inflict irreparable harm, and the shadows could very well be destroyed. This was not an outcome he could accept. However, all Mo received in response was even more ferocious dragon roars that came from within the river. Mo's eyes flashed with displeasure. "How stubborn! I'm giving you one last chance. I can promise you that once this battle is over, I'll give the humans a great territory where they can carry on living free of the corruption from Black Ink's strength, which will never enter that great territory." This was the most it was willing to compromise. Mu was gone and the remaining humans no longer mattered to him. He was only willing to give the humans the space of a single great territory for their race to survive for the sake of protecting Mu's spacetime river. "In your dreams." The dragon roar exploded out of the spacetime river. Through the restriction of the Tao strengths, Mo could vaguely see a pair of large golden eyes staring in its direction. "Foolish impudence." Mo coldly snorted in response. He then took a step forward to enter the space-time river. However, as soon as he stepped into the river, the water surged and the power of all the Tao strengths rushed about to block his path. He had to pause outside the river instead. It looked as if Mo was stuck outside the river as endless waves crashed down upon him, but he was still slowly making his way forward. Mo could not be stopped. Yang Kai's expression hardened. He had refined quite a lot of the Tao strengths from Mu's spacetime river in a short span of time and strengthened his own spacetime river greatly. He was even able to use a bit of the strength from Mu's river itself, but even so, it was not his strength, so he could not wield it freely. He had no way of keeping Mo out if the latter chose to force his way in. Soon Yang Kai made up his mind. Since he could not keep Mo out, he was not going to even try. The spacetime river was a mysterious place made up of the solidified Grand Taos with spacetime Tao strength as its foundation. Even if Mo entered the river, it would not be easy for him to locate Yang Kai. The only thing Yang Kai could do now was to avoid Mo's attacks while doing his best to refine the river and strengthen himself. As long as he could grow powerful enough, he could put up a fight against Mo. Just as Yang Kai prepared himself for this final gambit, Mo, who was busy pushing his way into the river, abruptly turned his head around and looked over his shoulder. He had sensed something strange. A brief moment later, a spark of white light appeared in the distance where countless masters from the Black Ink clan were stationed. The white light shrouded a figure which was traveling at astonishing speed. Everywhere this figure passed, all of the Black Ink clansmen turned into a sea of black blood, be they simple soldiers or royal lords. In just a flash, the white light arrived at the spacetime river and Zhang Ruoxi's figure appeared. She looked around and immediately established the situation, her eyes flashing darkly as they fixed on Mo. When their eyes met, Mo froze in place. He did not expect a master like her to exist. Based on the information he had, the strongest humans were only the Ninth Order masters, and even among their other allies, the strongest were merely giant spirit gods. Yet, the woman who just arrived had an aura that seemed even stronger than that of a giant spirit god. When Mo sensed the clean and pure strength of the new arrival, his expression suddenly contorted as he roared, "It's you!" He recognized the source of that strength. Zhang Ruoxi understood what Mo meant. When the burning light and serene glimmer strength finally harmonized in the chaotic dead territory, the memories of her Heaven's Order bloodline began awakening. So she was not completely clueless about the events of the ancient past. Thus, when she heard what Mo said, she coolly replied, "Yes and no. It is. It's you." Mo's expression had changed rather drastically. Even when Yang Kai suppressed and sealed over 30% of his source, he took everything in stride and could even thank the latter. However, when Mo saw Zhang Ruoxi, the darkness hidden deep within him overtook everything else. He leapt out of the spacetime river and murderously flew over to Zhang Ruoxi, but all of a sudden, he stopped and shook his head as he muttered, "No. That can't be." Black Ink strength continued to surge through him before he suddenly lifted his head and leveled a vicious glare at Zhang Ruoxi and bellowed, "No, it is you." Mo behaved as if he had lost his mind and he began to mumble and contradict himself, seemingly completely out of sorts. All of a sudden, he flashed forwards and reappeared in front of Zhang Ruoxi, sending his fist flying as he roared, "Why?" Martial Peak Chapter 5981 Light and Darkness. When the gate formed, primordial light and primordial darkness came into existence. From then on, their paths differed entirely. The primordial light signified all that was good and wonderful in the universe, and as soon as it was born, it left and became the colors of everything in existence. On the other hand, the primordial darkness remained suppressed and sealed behind the gate. Time went on, and even when it developed its own consciousness, it could not escape. It was stuck in an endless sea of darkness and loneliness. Even the primordial darkness craved the light. If it had not been for Mu's pity and its own persistent efforts, it would still be suppressed and sealed inside the gate right now, with no hope of ever getting out. Why? We both came into existence together, so why did the primordial light get to leave while I, the darkness, had to remain in isolation? Mo sent his fist crashing down at Zhang Ruoxi, but his interrogative cry for an answer was not directed at her. It was directed at the heavenly way which had been so unfair. Zhang Ruoxi's Heaven's Order sword rose to block Mo's furious strike, which sent her flying away in a flash of white light. A mere breath later, she flew back and stood in front of Mo. Her brow furrowed as she studied him. She could sense that there was something amiss about Mo's present state. Just as Mo had previously said to Mu and the humans had made the right choice when they suppressed and sealed him inside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. As his power grew, his consciousness was barely able to control his own power. If Mu and the other humans had not suppressed and sealed him, everything would have already been wiped from existence. Yang Kai traversed across over 2,000 universe worlds and suppressed and sealed about a third of Mo's source strength. Although this weakened Mo's maximum power, it proved to be of great help to Mo as well, for he was now able to have full control over his strength. However, when Mo saw Zhang Ruoxi and sensed her power which entirely opposed its own, black ink strength consumed his mind. Light and darkness had always been opposing forms of existence. The separation of the gate was the only reason why both came into existence at the same time. Now that both of these opposing powers stood before each other, it turned into a battle that would not end until one was vanquished. Black ink strength surged and gathered into an endless sea that seemed to drown out the entire void before charging straight at Zhang Ruoxi and completely shrouding her. Zhang Ruoxi's wings flickered behind her as her Heaven's Order sword lightly tapped the spot at her feet. All at once, light burst forth and vanquished the spreading darkness. However, Mo seized this chance to draw nearer, swinging both his fists down at Zhang Ruoxi. She blocked with her sword but was once again sent tumbling. After her many years of hard cultivation back in the chaotic dead territory, her power had grown by leaps and bounds thanks to her Heaven's Order bloodline as well as the power of the sun's burning light and moon's serene glimmer. In terms of pure prowess alone, she was stronger than a giant spirit god and no royal lord could withstand more than 3 attacks from her. That being said, now that she was up against Mo's frenzied attacks, she was at a complete disadvantage and could not even hold her ground against him. The primordial light had left as soon as it came into existence. It then split the power of yin and yang from itself. Afterwards it crashed into what would become the divine spirit ancestral land, and brought forth the many divine spirits and a human woman who possessed the Heaven's Order bloodline. If Zhang Ruoxi could have gathered the pure power of yin and yang, and all of the divine spirits, then with the help of the Heaven's Order bloodline, she could have brought forth the full power of the primordial light once more. Alas, too many divine spirits had perished, and the surviving ones numbered far too few in comparison to their peak. Even if Zhang Ruoxi wanted to try and bring forth the true power of the primordial light, there was no way for her to accomplish that. In other words, the strength she possessed now was incomplete. However, black ink strength was incomplete as well. Zhang Ruoxi could sense the many gaps in Mo's source. Nevertheless, even in this state, Mo was still the one with the upper hand as he had continued to grow stronger over millions of years. After just a brief exchange, Zhang Ruoxi knew full well that she was not Mo's equal. She could only hold out for another half hour or so before she would be defeated. And from the ruthless, murderous look on Mo's face right now, if she were to be defeated, death was the only outcome that awaited her. She had no choice. Zhang Ruoxi let out a soft sigh, and after blocking yet another one of Mo's attacks, she raised her hand and made a grabbing motion as she cried out, "Come!" A devastating battle had broken out outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. When Zhang Ruoxi was around, her strength alone had been enough to deter the Black Ink clan, making them fearfully hide in the darkness. However, once she left, the Black Ink clan sensed that their Supreme One had regained its power, so they jumped into action. They emerged from the darkness and challenged the small stone race army. All at once, brutal fights exploded across the void. The small stone race army numbered in the hundreds of millions, but the Black Ink clan army that emerged from the endless darkness far surpassed even that. This was the result of Mo's accumulation over millions of years, so it was impossible to imagine just how many masters from the Black Ink clan there were right now. There was no lack of royal lords either. Faced with such a massive army, the human race army, which only numbered a couple tens of millions, was nothing more than a drop in the ocean. It was only now that the humans realized just how ridiculous their crusade was. If the human race had to face off against that many masters from the Black Ink clan alone, they had no chance of winning. Thankfully, Zhang Ruoxi brought the small stone race army with her. Hundreds of millions of small stone race soldiers bore the brunt of the battle, so the humans had a fighting chance. Though the human race army was far smaller in number, it consisted entirely of elite masters whose strength could not be underestimated. Under Mi Jingluan's command, the human army moved in an organized fashion to attack the Black Ink clan and grind down their power. If someone from the Black Ink clan was targeted by the humans, their fate was sealed as they had no means of escaping. The humans had grown stronger too and had dozens of Ninth Order masters among their ranks. Furthermore, Wuquang no longer needed to control the primordial heaven source grand restriction, and thus the terror of the heaven-devouring battle law was unleashed for all to see. Relying on the heritage of a peak Ninth Order master, Wuquang weaved through the Black Ink clan army alone and killed all in his path. Even the royal lords could not stop him. The situation with the two giant spirit gods had changed as well. At the start of the battle, they had to guard the opening at the primordial heaven source grand restriction, and had been besieged by swarms of royal lords as a result. Now that the primordial heaven source grand restriction was no more, they were no longer pinned down. Nothing held Ada and Air back anymore, so they worked together to rampage through the Black Ink clan army. Everywhere they went, they crushed the enemy in their path. Furthermore, there were also the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters. These 8 were scattered across the Black Ink clan army as they slaughtered their opponents. Though it looked as if they were fighting separately, their auras remained connected in a battle formation that could bolster the strength of any one of them at any moment. Some of the more arrogant royal lords had suffered due to ignorance and died from a single blow from them as a result. Even though the royal lords might be as powerful as the Ninth Order small stone race masters, their opponent could borrow the strength of their fellow masters at any time, completely blindsiding the royal lords. In this, the fiercest battle to have ever taken place in human history, huge swaths of soldiers from the small stone race and Black Ink clan died every second. The divine spirits who received the Great Sun and Great Moon marks from Yangkai weaved through the battlefield to wield the power of the two marks. Each time they did so, yellow and blue light would shoot out from the rocks left behind by the fallen small stone race members. The two lights merged and turned into dazzling purifying light that killed scores of the Black Ink clan army. At the same time, it cleared the Black Ink strength left behind by the deaths of the Black Ink clansmen, thus changing the environment of the battlefield. The human race army kept snaking their way around the battlefield without ever coming to a stop, as they would be surrounded by the Black Ink clan if they did. The situation was dire and fraught with tension. Even an old veteran like Mi Jingluan could not predict how this battle would ultimately go. The armies on both sides were too great in numbers. The battle had to proceed for some time before the chances of victory grew clearer. The human race and the small stone race armies simply had to work together to persistently slaughter their enemy and fight to emerge victorious. Everyone knew that this was the final battle. If they won, peace would return to all the lands, but if they lost, the humans had come to terms with the outcome of a defeat. All they could do now was give their all for one last time. Even though the humans focused on the outskirts of the battlefield, they were still under a lot of pressure. Now and then the Black Ink clan army would try to cut them off, and they would have to carve out a path for themselves through blood and slaughter. One after another, numerous warships exploded and the human race masters died alongside them. Amidst this battlefield, even the divine spirits were at risk of peril. A clear phoenix cry echoed through the void as the 30 or so different colored phoenixes transformed into their true forms and spread their wings. They were the only remaining clansmen of the Phoenix clan. The Phoenix clansmen were carefully guarding the giant parasol tree in their center, their sacred treasure. They had not used their sacred treasure in any of their precious battles, as it was the foundation of their existence. All of the Phoenix clan came from the immortal parasol tree. However, this was the final battle, so the Phoenix clan no longer held back. A white phoenix, together with its clansmen, sat on the parasol tree and wielded the power of the sacred treasure, causing space to twist and contort. The contortions circled the human race army, and as the space rippled, the humans vanished. At the very next breath, the human race army emerged in a completely different part of the battlefield where the situation was dire. The small stone race army's defense lines were on the verge of breaking. However, the Black Ink clan had been caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the human race army, and soon, the situation stabilized as the Black Ink clan suffered heavy casualties. Once again, space rippled. With the help of the power of the Phoenix clan and the immortal parasol tree, the human race army shuttled the void to different parts of the battlefield to stop the Black Ink clan's frenzied attempts to break through the front lines. Nevertheless, the Phoenix clan's aid could not be sustained forever. After numerous uses of their strength, they could no longer maintain their true forms and reverted back to their human forms. The immortal parasol tree then weakened and dimmed. Without the blessing of the immortal parasol tree, the humans lost their ability to freely traverse the battlefield. Worse, what they had done earlier drew the attention of countless masters from the Black Ink clan. And now the Black Ink clan charged at the humans in a bid to seek vengeance by wiping them out for good. Dragon roars then rang out as the Dragon clan combined their strength and summoned the Crystal Palace. Similarly, numerous sacred treasures were summoned across the battlefield. These were the foundation of the various divine spirit clans, and every single one of them had gone through countless years of accumulation and refinement. The divine spirits would not summon them unless their very existence was threatened. Martial Peak, Chapter 5982, 9 Palaces Formation. The divine spirits harnessed the power of their sacred treasures to aid the human race army in the fight to slaughter their common enemy. There were also 2 giant spirit gods and 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters thundering across the battlefield. Meanwhile, the small stone race army, which numbered hundreds of millions, staunchly held the front lines. As a result, compared to the small stone race and the humans, the Black Ink clan suffered far greater casualties on the battlefield. At some point, the human race masters began to see glimmers of hope for a victorious outcome. Alas, their hopes were soon dashed. The 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters who had been busy exterminating the enemy seemed to have been summoned by someone. With their aura connected, they charged through the Black Ink clan army and headed deep within the darkness. Soon they disappeared from sight. No one knew where they went exactly. However, Zhang Ruoxi had gone off in that direction earlier, and terrifying shockwaves were now rippling out from that area. Atop the tattered Puryang Pass, Mi Jingluan's heart sank as he realized that Zhang Ruoxi must have encountered some kind of trouble. Based on the strength Zhang Ruoxi exhibited earlier, the only threat against her had to be Mo. The primordial heaven's source grand restriction had been destroyed and Mo had awakened. Thus, the battle reached its final, most critical climax. The departure of the 8 Ninth Order small stone races greatly eased the pressure on the Black Ink clan. The 8 of them had focused on killing off territory lords and royal lords, with many of the latter suffering or even dying to the targeted attacks. Now that the 9th Order small stone race masters left the battlefield, there were only the 2 giant spirit gods remaining, and Ada and Aer could not kill off the royal lords as swiftly as the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters. In the end, size was the deciding factor. Naturally, the 9th Order small stone race masters were weaker than the giant spirit gods, but they were the same size as humans and could move around deftly. Any royal lord they had their eyes on could not escape from them. The same could not be said for the giant spirit gods. They were too massive, and though their strength was unparalleled, they were not nearly as nimble or flexible. Each time they attacked, large swaths of the Black Ink clansmen would die, but those who reacted in time could still escape. Thus, now that the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters left the battlefield, the royal lords were a lot less hindered and could do much more, such as grouping up to besiege the human race army. The Black Ink clan realized that even though the small stone race army made up the majority on the battlefield, the humans were the true driving force behind the battle. Furthermore, compared to the hundreds of millions of small stone race soldiers, it was easier to wipe out the humans, who only numbered in the tens of millions. As long as they killed off all the humans, they would emerge victorious regardless of the casualties they suffered. All at once, the human race army was under great pressure as they became the primary targets of the Black Ink clan. Oh! Deep inside the void, the intense battle between Zhang Ruoxi and Mo continued. It was the first time that the primordial light and darkness were together again since the dawn of creation, and as they clashed, the universe seemed to shatter and break. Mo seemed to have lost all reason as the fury that built up throughout all the eons poured out at once, leaving Zhang Ruoxi with barely any room to fight back. From a distance, the light and darkness could be seen clashing, with the ocean of darkness keeping the light completely surrounded. Only a feeble flicker of light could be seen coming from the center of the conflict. Darkness was constantly clawing at the light, and it looked as if the latter would be extinguished at any moment. Despite having over 30% of his source suppressed and sealed, Mo's might was still immeasurable and impossible to imagine. At the very least, he was more than what Zhang Ruoxi could handle. Earlier on, she estimated that she could hold out for half an hour. But now that they were well and truly engaged, she realized she had underestimated her opponent. The power of the primordial light had been dispersed, much of it disappearing with the death of the divine spirits. All that was left were the Heaven's Order bloodline and the power of the yin and yang. Therefore, the primordial light had lost even more of its strength than Mo. As the fight went on, Mo grew fiercer. Black Ink's strength surged and it looked as if he was on the verge of completely devouring Zhang Ruoxi. Zhang Ruoxi was at a great disadvantage, and her situation only eased once she summoned the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters over. They left the main battlefield and swiftly headed straight over to Zhang Ruoxi. From a distance, their connected auras linked up with Zhang Ruoxi's, and a battle formation was instantly formed. Previously, the 8 trigrams formation formed by the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters had stunned the human race masters. But if they saw what was happening now, they would have no words to describe their shock and awe. Zhang Ruoxi and the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters formed a 9 Palaces formation, the most powerful of all battle formations. Zhang Ruoxi acted as the core while the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters formed the base. All at once, Ruoxi's power soared and she was no longer cornered without any means of fighting back. The flash of light expanded amid the darkness and broke free of its restraints. It now had the power to fight back and cover a greater area in brightness. Mo sensed this change and grew even more furious, unleashing even more concentrated black ink strength from his body. The two continued to clash, and each time light and darkness collided, darkness would spread out behind Mo, while light and the 8 Ninth Order Small Stone Race Masters followed closely behind Zhang Ruoxi. Time and time again, the two smashed against each other, neither side showing any signs of backing down. With each clash, the void crumbled and shattered. A battle of such immense power had never occurred before, and it would never occur again. This was a battle between the primordial forces of existence. The intense fight went on for hours, with no side able to overwhelm the other. With the help of the battle formation with her small stone race personal guard, Zhang Ruoxi could finally oppose Mo on even footing. Nevertheless, this was merely a battle formation and not her own strength. The prolonged fight not only continued to add to the pressure that Zhang Ruoxi faced, but even the 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters were struggling. The 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters had tough bodies, weaker than Yang Kai's Divine Dragon physique, but not by much. Under normal circumstances, they would not be facing any issues. However, the long and intense fight proved to be a burden that was slowly exceeding their ability to bear. Cracks began to appear on the bodies of the 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters, and as Zhang Ruoxi and Mo continued to clash, these cracks grew. Soon the cracks weaved across their bodies like spider webs. It could be seen that once the cracks reached a certain point, even the 9th Order Small Stone Race Masters would crumble into a pile of rocks. These small stone races were Ruoxi's personal guard. They had been groomed with great difficulty and were intrinsically connected to her, so she could sense the state of every single one of them. Therefore, when she picked up on their injuries, she realized that things were looking bad for them. She was only able to fight Mo because she had formed a battle formation with her small stone race personal guard. But if something happened to the latter, the battle formation would collapse, even if only one of them died. Once that happened, it would be impossible for her to hold her own against Mo. Once this thought occurred to her, Zhang Ruoxi changed her strategy. Instead of confronting Mo head-on, she took a defensive stance to drag the fight out. She did not know what her sir was doing now, but all along, she knew that he was capable of doing things no one else could, and she held strongly to this belief. Sir can always make a miracle happen even in a hopeless situation. Therefore, regardless of what he was doing now, she had to try and buy him enough time. Her new strategy worked. When two opponents were evenly matched, one could not accomplish much if the other was determined to prolong the fight. The intense fight turned into a chase instead. Ruoxi and her 8 small stone race personal guard kept flitting about, and even though Mo wielded his immense power wildly, he could not pin down and suppress her. Mo, who had already lost his senses, became even more incensed, releasing bestial snarls and roars in an unending cacophony. When Mo first emerged from the space-time river, he looked no different from a regular human, apart from his black ink strength. However, when Zhang Ruoxi showed up, the black ink strength surged and overtook his mind. At this point, Mo no longer looked human. Ruoshi's appearance and subsequent actions seemed to have driven him mad. All of a sudden, Emo stopped chasing Zhang Ruoshi. As Zhang Ruoshi puzzled over this, Emo abruptly turned around and charged towards the space-time river. Ruoshi's expression stiffened. Although Emo had been so agitated that he lost his senses, his battle instincts remained. Since Zhang Ruoshi was equal in strength to him, he could not get rid of her, so he changed his target to Yongkai, who was still within the space-time river. Even in his blurry state, he was still determined to protect the space-time river. He was not going to let anyone touch the final trace of Mu. Upon seeing that Emo was turning back, Zhang Ruoshi swiftly chased after him. Light flashed as she stopped him and engaged in a frontal battle again. After a brief skirmish, Ruoshi repeated her old tactic and quickly retreated. This led to a furious Emo pursuing her in the opposite direction of the space-time river. Emo kept up the chase for a while, but when his efforts proved fruitless, he turned around again. Once again Ruoshi caught up to him. By doing this over and over again, she managed to occupy Mo's attention. Nonetheless, Zhang Ruoshi knew this was only a temporary measure. She could tell that Emo was not in the right state of mind at the moment, which was why he did not notice what she was doing with her fairly crude strategy. However, with each clash, the power of the light would wipe out some of the darkness, and similarly the darkness would devour the light. In other words, both light and darkness were weakening each other each time they collided. Zhang Ruoshi could clearly sense that she was greatly weakened by the many hours of fighting, and the same was true of Emo. Once the Black Ink's strength was weakened to a certain extent, Emo would most likely regain his senses, and when that time came she would no longer be able to use this strategy to keep him occupied. Furthermore, Ruoshi was even more worried by the fact that the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters would not be able to hold out much longer. Their bodies were covered in cracks now, and it looked as if they would crumble at the slightest touch. She was doing her best to keep the head-on confrontations with Emo to a minimum, but if she wanted to stop Emo from heading to the space-time river, she had to resort to things that she knew she should not. Now that things had come to this, Zhang Ruoshi had no other choice. She could only do her best to keep Emo occupied, as she fervently hoped that Yongkai sped up whatever he was doing. Otherwise, once her personal guards could no longer hold out anymore, she would not be able to stop Emo alone. Martial Peak, Chapter 5983, 9th Level. Within Mu's spacetime river, Yongkai was shrouded in his own spacetime river, as he used it to greedily devour everything around him. The river was made out of Dao strengths. Every single undercurrent and wave surged with Dao strength, and as time passed, Yongkai's spacetime river grew bigger while Mu's river shrank. It was entirely by chance, but it could not be denied that Yongkai and Mu had walked the same path. This gave meaning to Mu's countless years of patience and perseverance. Due to trying to open the profound source gate in the past, Mu's spacetime river was no longer complete, which cut off her future path. She could not explore the deeper mysteries of the martial Dao. Therefore, she passed down her hopes to those who came after her. Among all the hidden hands she left behind, her spacetime river was the final gift she had to offer. However, if a person wanted to harness this gift to make themselves more powerful, it would take time. Perhaps even Mu would not have expected Yongkai to be approved by so many of her remnant shadows. Under normal circumstances, if Black Ink's strength had the irrefutable advantage in any of the 3,000 universe worlds and there was no hope of suppressing and sealing that particular source piece, there would be no reason for Yongkai to waste any time on that universe world. Nevertheless, during Yongkai's previous travels, he did his best to find every single remaining shadow of Mu. He wanted to save them all from their suffering and take them away from the universe worlds. Each one that disappeared signified that the Mu of that time approved of Yongkai. After moving through some 2,700 universe worlds, Yongkai received approval from over 2,000 of them, which was a massive number. This allowed him to devour and refine Mu's spacetime river with greater efficiency. As Yongkai's river kept expanding, his command over the many Dao strengths increased as well. The enlightenment from the many mysteries exploded in his mind. Yongkai was deeply engrossed and could not extricate himself from what was happening inside his mind. The joy of glimpsing into the mysteries of every Grand Dao was impossibly tantalizing for any master. Grand Daos were the basis behind all existence, and the ultimate goal of all cultivators. If someone were to be entirely immersed in this, there was a chance that they would forget all else and transform into Tao strengths themselves. This meant that Yang Kai's situation was tricky as well. On the one hand, he had to resist the lure of the Tao strengths, while on the other, he had to do his best to take them in to strengthen his own mastery of the Grand Das. He tried his best to maintain the balance of refining as quickly as possible while still remaining in control over his senses, making sure to not let himself be lost in the process. All of a sudden, his mind felt as if it had received an awakening. It was as if he had broken through a barrier that had been preventing him from growing stronger. Yang Kai realized that his mastery of the Tao of Time had reached the 9th level. A master's strength was essentially divided based on their cultivation. Of the 9 orders of the open heaven realm, each higher order was much stronger than the previous. It was a clear and easy way of distinguishing between masters. However, this kind of division was not comprehensive, and there could be great disparity in power even among masters in the same order of open heaven realm. The disparity came from the difference in accumulation of each master, the power differential in the heritage of the master's small universe, as well as the master's understanding of their Grand Das. The open heaven realm involved the discovery and mastery of Grand Tao. In a sense, the higher the mastery of one's Grand Tao, the stronger the master. Since the dawn of existence, no one had a clear way of defining the levels of mastery of the Grand Tao. Thus, Yang Kai had split the mastery of Grand Das into 9 levels based on his own growth. Superficial contact, peering through the doors, taking the initial steps, traversing a familiar path, attaining mastery through comprehensive understanding, exceeding the ordinary to reach the extraordinary, standing above all others within sight, summiting the peak, and finally shocking history and dazzling the present. This was merely his own method of division, one he shared with others, and some had adopted it. Until now, none tried to correct it. Yang Kai felt that he had differentiated them correctly. His primary Grand Daos were the Tao of Time and the Tao of Space. These were the Tao strengths that formed the basis of the space-time river. However, despite his many opportunities and his mastery over the Grand Das, after all this time, he had only managed to cultivate the Tao of Time and the Tao of Space to the 8th level. All this while, Yang Kai did not know how to break through to the 9th level. However, he had a vague feeling that if his mastery of the Tao of Time reached the 9th level, an indescribable change was bound to happen. Finally, as Yang Kai refined Mu's space-time river, he was able to make a breakthrough on one of his primary Grand Das, allowing it to reach the 9th level. To think it's the Tao of Time first, not the Tao of Space. Yang Kai had always thought it would have been the latter that would be the first to reach the 9th level of mastery. Yang Kai was a little taken aback as the Tao of Space was the first one that he truly cultivated. He had his dragon source to thank for his ability to cultivate the Tao of Time to its current level. The Tao of Time was the bloodline talent of the dragon clan. All at once, Yang Kai gained a mysterious sense of understanding. As he lifted his hand ever so slightly within the space-time river, he seemed to be able to grab onto the flow of time. In the past, he was able to make time flow quicker within his space-time river to cultivate 10 times faster, but he could not truly control the passage of time. But he could do so now. With the increase in Yang Kai's command over the Tao of Time, his dragon veins surged and he could not stop himself from raising his head and letting out a dragon roar. His dragon scales rustled as his dragon form enlarged. His dragon vein had advanced even further. This was a great surprise. However, before Yang Kai could dwell on his joy, his mastery over his other primary Grand Tao broke into the 9th level as well. This time it was the Tao of Space. Once again, the mysterious sense of enlightenment flooded Yang Kai's mind. He felt his mind grow hazy. It was as if it had been stuffed full with the truth of the Grand Das, which he did not understand in the past. The truth of existence was unfolding in front of him. He quickly harnessed the strength of his soul-warming lotus, even though he was uncertain whether it would help. The clarity that poured back into his mind made him feel a little better. Now that Yang Kai's mastery of both the Tao of Space and the Tao of Time had reached the 9th level, his space-time river became even more massive. Previously, his space-time river looked like a blade of grass in comparison to Mu's river, which was like a tall tree. However, after all the refining he had done thus far, his river grew bigger and could now be likened to a shrub instead. While the tree was still a tree, it had grown a lot smaller. That was not the only difference. At first, Yang Kai had a hard time keeping up with his frenzied attempt to refine Mu's river to strengthen his own. The Tao strengths of space and time formed the foundation of the river, and without a strong enough command over both, it was hard for Yang Kai to control the colossal river. It was akin to a building. If a building's foundation had only been built for 5 stories, the building ran the risk of collapsing if 10 stories were built instead. Yang Kai's command over the Taos of time and Tao of space was the foundation in this scenario, and by having a greater mastery over these 2 grand Taos, his foundation became stronger. This transformation was evident in the river's physical state. While it looked a little scattered earlier, it was now a lot more concentrated. Martial Peak, Chapter 5984, Standstill. With the grand Taos of space and time breaking through to the 9th level of mastery, Yang Kai's spacetime river now had a stronger foundation. Thus, it began devouring and refining Mu's spacetime river at a far quicker rate. As the frenzy of devouring and refining continued, Yang Kai's mastery over the grand Taos increased as well. Next was a breakthrough in the spear Tao. Then a breakthrough in the sword Tao. Breakthroughs in the alchemic Tao, array Tao, and yin-yang Tao soon followed. Yang Kai's understanding of each grand Tao rose in rapid succession. The barriers were broken through and he achieved a new height of mastery. With each breakthrough, Yang Kai's mind was filled with strange and wondrous enlightenment, granting him further clarity in each grand Tao. Outside the space-time river, light and darkness continued to clash. Both the primordial light and primordial darkness did not possess their full power anymore. But as the darkness remained whole and continued to grow over the years, Mo had become a lot more powerful than Zhang Ruoxi. This held true even when Yang Kai had used the profound source gate to suppress and seal a third of his source. Mo would have regained all of his strength and be even more powerful right now if it had not been for the many hidden hands Mu left behind. Zhang Ruoxi could only just barely challenge Mo to a fight with the help of the 9 palaces formation she formed with her 8 small stone race personal guard. In just a few hours though, the 8 small stone race masters were littered with cracks. It looked as if they could crumble into a pile of rubble at any moment now. Zhang Ruoxi tried her best to buy time, but she did not know how much longer she could continue to hold out. All she could do was fervently hope that Yang Kai could hurry up. Each time light and darkness collided, their respective powers wore down the other. Light dispelled darkness while darkness devoured light. Time and time again, Zhang Ruoxi and Mo continued to weaken each other. This was most evident in the way Ruoxi's white wings had dimmed and Mo seemed to have lost some of his prior madness. This is not a good sign. Zhang Ruoxi could tell that Mo, as the consciousness that sprung from primordial darkness, did not have full control over Black Ink's strength. The years of growth and accumulation had made the power increase beyond Mo's ability to freely wield. That was the reason why her arrival bearing the strength of the primordial light had drawn out the frenzied resentment of the primordial darkness and caused Mo to lose his rationality. At the same time, Mo had an instinctive, obsessive yearning and protectiveness of Mu's spacetime river. Even his subconscious would not allow anyone to touch what Mu had left behind. As Black Ink's strength clashed with Mo's consciousness, his actions began displaying contradicting desires. At times he fiercely chased down Zhang Ruoxi, but at times he turned back around to head for the spacetime river. Zhang Ruoxi relied on this dichotomy to provoke Mo and keep him occupied. However, once Mo regained his senses, it would not be so easy for her to do so. Although Mo currently possessed strength that surpassed all others, he was currently behaving like a wild beast without a sense of rationality, so Zhang Ruoxi could still deal with him by employing the right strategy. Even though Mo regaining his rationality meant that his raw power would be weaker, Zhang Ruoxi was not confident that she could stop him then. What one feared the most was often the very thing to occur. As the clashes continued, Zhang Ruoxi could sense that Mo's gaze was getting clearer. To make things worse, her personal guard could barely hold out anymore. That was not the only bad news though. Even her strength, which relied on her Heaven's Order bloodline to harmonize the powers of Yin and Yang, was beginning to show signs of instability. Her Heaven's Order bloodline was indeed powerful. It was the only thing that could bridge the powers granted by the burning light and serene glimmer. Thanks to Zhang Ruoxi's many years of diligent cultivation, she was finally able to reconcile the two opposing powers and draw them into her. As a result, she possessed superior strength. However, her ninth order cultivation was still quite weak in comparison to the powers of the burning light and serene glimmer. She could not withstand a prolonged fight that involved such overwhelming power. On the other hand, Zhang Ruoxi dared not hold back in a fight against Mo. She went all out with every strike, and as the number of clashes increased, her power became more and more unstable. Her personal guards were in bad shape and her strength was becoming unstable, so she knew she did not have much time left. Even so, she never once considered retreating. Instead, her eyes filled with determination as she made a decision. After yet another ferocious clash, the two figures separated. Zhang Ruoxi could clearly sense that even more cracks emerged on the bodies of the 8 personal guard behind her. Her grip on the Heaven's Order sword tightened, and she exhaled softly as her wings began to flap and her presence grew even more imposing. In the void opposite her, Mo stood unmoving with his head lowered. Just as Zhang Ruoxi prepared to strike once more, Mo raised his hand to block her. "You should stop now." Zhang Ruoxi did not listen. Her presence continued to intensify with no signs of stopping. Nevertheless, she could not ignore Mo's present state and could not help asking, "Have you regained your rationality?" Mo raised his head and looked at her. Although his eyes showed signs of a struggle, it was no longer in a state of madness. "I have to thank you for that," he replied. Zhang Ruoxi knew what Mo meant. Initially, the power of primordial darkness was still too strong for Mo to bear, causing his consciousness to devolve into a frenzied state. However, as he and Zhang Ruoxi continued to clash, the powers of light and darkness ate away at each other. Both their powers were weakened in the battle. Now that Mo's consciousness could overpower his strength, he regained some rationality. "That won't be necessary," Zhang Ruoxi coolly replied. Mo's brows furrowed ever so slightly. "You will die if you use that attack." Mo could tell that Zhang Ruoxi wanted to harness all of her remaining power to engage him in a final clash that would determine life or death. "You probably won't die, but you will suffer," Zhang Ruoxi said. "That's why you should stop." "I don't wish to kill you," Mo urged. Zhang Ruoxi showed no signs of stopping. She did not respond to Mo at all. Instead, she continued to harness her power and strength to prove her determination with her actions. Cracking sounds could be heard from the 8 behind her. With this strike, the 8 of them would turn into dust. Mo's gaze turned cold as he snarled, "If you insist on dying, I am willing to fulfill your desire for death. But have you thought about what would happen to Yang Kai if you died?" Zhang Ruoxi was a little startled. "Sir would be deeply saddened by my death, right? That's enough for me." Zhang Ruoxi still showed no signs of backing down. Instead, she let out a faint smile. This made Mo exasperated as he could not resist saying, "Why are human women so stubborn? You think it's worth it to die at my hands to protect him, but have you ever thought about the guilt and torture the living would have to endure? If you truly want to act in his best interests, I advise you to calm down and look at things from his perspective. You staying alive should come before everything else." Zhang Ruoxi stared at Mo in shock this time, brimming with confusion. "What's going on? The one who wields the darkest of all powers that exist is attempting to reason with me during a life and death moment." She could not help but find it unbelievable, especially since Mo made a good point. Instinctively, she suddenly felt that Mo was scheming something. "Don't look at me like that," Mo curtly snorted. "I lived among you humans for more years than you have lived. We once worked together and protected each other. There was even someone very important to me once. All I wanted to do was to help her, but in the end I was destined to ruin everything." When Mo saw what Zhang Ruoxi was about to do, he could not help but recall his own past. "Mu must have felt great anguish when she decided to lock me up. In the end I let her down." Mo turned towards the space-time river and said, "Why don't we just wait here? When he comes out I will fight him." Zhang Ruoxi frowned as she looked at Mo, too afraid to let her guard down. Mo turned back to her once more. "There's nothing for you to worry about. You are free to strike me at any given moment and engage me in a fight to the death. As you said, even if I kill you, I will suffer in the process, and when he comes out, perhaps I won't be able to hold my own against him." Zhang Ruoxi simply could not figure out what Mo was thinking. It would indeed be great for her if she did as Mo suggested. She had enough strength to unleash a powerful final strike, and she could do so at any time. So the only one who had anything to gain by agreeing to Mo's suggestion was her. Besides, even if Mo was plotting something sinister, would she be able to stop him? If Mo is truly willing to simply stop and wait now, Once Sir comes out, he and I can attack Mo together. You better not do anything rash." After hesitating for a brief moment, Zhang Ruoxi withdrew her imposing aura. Naturally, Mo smirked as it remained standing in place. Zhang Ruoxi nodded. The two masters who had been dueling in a brutal, all-out fight to the death now stood together in the void, waiting in silence. Sure enough, life was unpredictable. Zhang Ruoxi was still on guard, so she led her 8 personal guards over to a spot between Mo and the space-time river to block Mo. Mo saw what she was doing and showed no inclination of stopping her, puzzling her even further. That being said, she had never encountered Mo before. She imagined Mo to be a brutal, sinister, and vicious existence, but after interacting with him herself, she realized that was not the case. Though confused as Zhang Ruoxi stared into Mo's eyes, she had a vague inkling and could not help but ask, "What do you want to do?" Mo's gaze went past her and stared at the massive space-time river as he asked, "It's very grand and beautiful, isn't it?" Zhang Ruoxi did not answer Mo's question, instead frowning in doubt. "So what if it is?" "It saved me from endless darkness," Mo replied, "so to me it is the light. This is what she left behind, and since she has chosen a successor, I want to see what happens. If her successor can kill me, it won't be a bad way for me to die." After a pause, Mo continued with a heavy heart, "When it comes down to it, I did something I shouldn't have. It only stands to reason that I pay the price for it. If you wish to die, I can fulfill your wish for you." Zhang Ruoxi shot back. Mo eyed her coolly, "Only the person who gave me my new life can kill me. No one else has the right to do so." Martial Peak, Chapter 5985, Perseverance. Alas, the one who had the right to kill Mo was no longer around and nothing mattered to him anymore. Everything and everyone in existence was meaningless, and he could kill them off as he desired without feeling any hesitance. Zhang Ruoxi and Mo stood opposite each other outside the space-time river. She remained vigilant at all times, but Mo did not do anything. He simply stared at the space-time river that cut through the void and watched as it churned. Meanwhile, the human race army was snaking its way through the large battlefield, as it constantly attacked the Black Ink Clan army's front lines to weaken them. The humans were actually able to make good progress. Furthermore, the small stone race army was fearlessly confronting the Black Ink Clan. Many lives came to an end with every breath. A battle of this scale had never been seen before. The 3 parties out on the battlefield numbered into the billions when combined. The small stone race army consisted of hundreds of millions, while the Black Ink Clan army was twice as large. On the other hand, there were less than 20 million human race masters left, which was not even a tenth of either of the other two. Despite being much lower in numbers, the humans came out on top when it came to the average power. Only 4th Order masters and above could directly join in the crusade, and after many millennia of cultivation, the human race now had a large number of 7th Order and 8th Order masters. In this respect, neither the small stone race nor the Black Ink Clan could compare to the humans. Even though they had massive numbers, weak soldiers who could not contribute much made up most of their ranks. This was especially true of the Black Ink Clan. Whenever the human race army crossed paths with large groups of the Black Ink Clan's cannon fodder, all of the latter would be exterminated in great sweeping waves of death. Nevertheless, being so few was still an undeniable disadvantage. Although the human race army was able to attack the Black Ink Clan and wipe them out in large groups, they could not persist for long. The humans started this battle, but it was the small stone race army that enabled them to keep going. If Zhang Ruoxi had not brought the small stone race reinforcements over, the humans would have been defeated the moment the primordial heaven source grand restriction broke. These were sorrowful times. Many of the small stone race soldiers died and turned into rocks and pebbles that littered the battlefield. The divine spirits who had the great sun and great moon marks kept using the power of the marks to draw out the power of yin and yang inside the remains of the small stone race who had been sacrificed. These powers were then transformed into purifying light, which not only killed many Black Ink clansmen, but also purified the environment of the battlefield. It was thanks to this that the humans and the small stone race could still put up a fight against the Black Ink Clan. Initially, Ada and Aer, the 2 giant spirit gods, were able to move about with impunity. Without enough royal lords to keep them pinned down, they were completely invincible and seas of blood formed wherever they went. However, as more and more of the royal lords joined forces to besiege Ada and Aer, the latter pair slowly lost their ability to act freely. The fierce battle continued. Every few days, the human race army would retreat behind the small stone race's lines to rest and regroup before charging out again. Pyryang Pass, which led the human race army into battle, was now a wreck. It did not look like it could hold out much longer, and the suppressing Black Ink Fortress was in a similar state. The extreme intensity of the battle was a taxing trial for all the humans, with even the Ninth Order masters having a hard time, let alone those of lower orders. Nevertheless, the humans could not stop. This was the final confrontation, and if they backed down, total extermination was the only fate that awaited them. Therefore, all of them grit their teeth and persevered. A month after the start of the battle, the situation on the battlefield grew clearer. Mi Jingluan was fatigued and ashen-faced as he stood atop the worn Pyryang Pass, his forehead covered in a layer of sweat. He had overexerted himself. As the supreme commander of the human race army, he faced the most pressure. Not only did he have to keep an eye on the situation on the battlefield to promptly make the right strategic decisions, but as a Ninth Order master, he was also in charge of controlling Pyryang Pass to attack the enemy. At this point, he had expended so much energy that his foundation had suffered heavy damage. However, his sense of helplessness stemmed not from his exhaustion, but from the fact that the situation was not in the human race's favor. There were far too many of the Black Ink clansmen inside the primordial heaven source grand restriction, twice as many as there were small stone race soldiers, and after a month-long battle, the Black Ink clan was beginning to show signs of suppressing the former. If this continued, in less than 2 weeks, the small stone race army would be defeated. Once the small stone race army was vanquished, the humans would not be able to survive. They were bound to follow the small stone race army to their deaths. Mi Jingluan could not be resigned to this. The fight between the human race and the Black Ink clan began towards the end of the late ancient era, and had carried on for millions of years since then. Was it going to end in tragedy for the human race? Still, there was not much he could do to change things now. In a massive battle like this, there was not a single strategy that could lead to a decisive outcome. Victory hinged on the strength of both parties. Mi Jingluan could not stop himself from casting a glance into the depths of the void. Over a month ago, Zhang Ruoxi had abruptly left the battlefield and the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters followed soon after. Nothing had been heard from them ever since. Initially, great aftershocks of an intense battle reverberated out from that part of the void, but soon everything went silent. Even now, Mi Jingluan did not know what was happening over there. All he knew was that Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guards were there. Yang Kai was there too, along with Mo. If anything could turn the tides of this battle, it had to come from that part of the void. Stay strong. We must persist. As long as the worst did not happen, they still had a shred of hope of survival. Oh, the churning of the space-time river became even more ferocious. After a month of devouring and refining Mu's space-time river, Yang Kai's space-time river had grown unimaginably large, while Mu's river, which was outside his, was turning into an empty shell. Thanks to this final gift, Yang Kai's space-time river had enlarged to the point where it could rival that of Mu's. Outside the river, Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guards were still in a battle formation. They were intrinsically connected and kept their guards up the whole time. Thankfully, throughout this whole time, Mo did not move. He merely stood quietly and waited. At last, a resounding splash sounded and the space-time river which had meandered across the void for countless eons was completely destroyed. It was replaced by another river that was comparable to it, but the new one was churning even more ferociously and its water seemed even more forceful. This was not a sign that Yang Kai had surpassed Mu in strength. Instead, it was a result of his inability to fully control this sudden growth in strength. If Yang Kai had full control over the power of his river, it would be completely still and silent, not causing such a huge commotion like now. Zhang Ruoxi had to fight the urge to turn around and look, her expression grim. Just a moment ago, she clearly sensed a flash of murderous intent coming from Mo. Mo did not bother to hide it at all. Apart from the clear murderous intent, Zhang Ruoxi also picked up a sense of hatred and regret. As she sensed the churning of the Tao strengths behind her, she knew that Yang Kai had succeeded, though she had no idea what he did. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.